La charte de l'UNESCO commence par une phrase qui est désormais célèbre et que je voudrais que les jeunes aussi s'approprient ici. C'est dans l'esprit des hommes et des femmes que naissent les germes de la guerre et c'est dans l'esprit des femmes et des hommes qu'il faut construire les défenses de la paix.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the Normandy Forum for Peace. So many are here today for this plenary session, for this fourth session here in Normandy for Peace. We have Frédérique Bedos, who is the founder of the project Imagine. Please, a round of applause. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to work here with you today. He's the Deputy President of the Normandy Region, and he's in charge with European affairs and also for promoting Normandy in the world, François-Xavier Priollaud.
Alors, petit rappel.
So let's have a quick reminder concerning the pandemic. So let's all abide by the distance regulations. Wear your mask when you're inside. You don't have to wear it outside, of course. This is one of the plus points concerning us to last year. And also, everyone who is on the stage can, if they want, not use a mask. You're here, you came in large numbers, and also many people remote were participating. All of this will be put on our site if it's the plenary session or the debates in the various workshops. You can also interact today, or you can connect to the various social media and also use the hashtag Normandy for Peace. We saw many things yesterday. It was a very rich debate. There was a lot of great emotions. And we had a work group with about 20 ambassadors, Francophone ambassadors from UNESCO. And this was upstream from the conference in Tunisia. And they all will be at the Summit for Peace, the Francophone Summit. We also had a very intense moment. The young rapper from Afghanistan, Sunita Alizad, she got the Peace Prize. She lives in the United States, and she is working against forced marriages. So, of course, Afghanistan is a very flashpoint right these days because of the fact that the United States left the country, departed, and the Taliban have taken over the country once again. And this is a big flashpoint for not only Afghanistan, but also for the international community. So we have to look at this topic here today also. And this is why here today for this plenary session, we're going to dedicate it to Afghanistan and also to the future of Afghan society and to its population. We are all worried about it, the future of these men and women who had to leave their own country. We cannot quite simply just close our eyes to what's happening in Afghanistan. So to open today's session, I'd like to ask you to give a round of applause to the President of the Normandy Region, Hervé Morin.
Bien, mesdames et
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so happy to be here once again this year for this fantastic forum. It was a challenge that we put together with François-Xavier, and I thank from my heart of hearts Mr. Priollaud for everything that he has done and for his hard work here. All of the ambassadors who were here yesterday they said that this is not only a national, but also an international renowned event. Also, what is very incredible about this time, these exchanges that we have, the university department that we've put together, and the various promises that we have from the European Parliament concerning security and peace questions, we also have to think about the participation at these international forums. We usually see people in suits with scripted presentations, but what's so impressive here is all of the young people that come here, because when you talk about freedom, security and peace, we have to start with culture, education, and also studying. And that's why it's very important that these high school students are here with us today. And this is not only a plus point, but it's also something that shows us that we're doing a good job. And thank you very much for coming, because we know that peace, freedom, and security, and also human rights, it starts in the school. So it's the best contribution that we can do to really bring forward our promises concerning peace and security. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank the permanent presence here on the stage. They're here. They've been here for the past 4 years. That means Monsieur Priollaud and Madame Bedos. And I'd also like to thank two big university professors, immense intellectuals, and they are experts in France concerning geostrategy and defense, Nicole Gnessot and Bertrand Badi. Thank you very much for being here and for enriching our debates. Bertrand, I was not lucky enough to go to Sciences Po, but I'm sure that you are an excellent professor. But I was able to read your document concerning geostrategy for all those who wish to. I please ask you to read his document concerning especially the Afghan topic. So I'd like to give a big thank you to both of you. So I'd like to start this session. It's not an easy debate. I prepared a script, but I'm going to be a little bit off script now. And I wanted to look at this topic with a great amount of humility, because I think it's necessary. The Afghan topic is something that doesn't lead to certainty. And we can't just say, we have the truth concerning this topic. But I wanted to give my own 2 cents. As I was the Minister of Defense for 3.5 years, I went to Afghanistan many times to speak with the French troops and to try to understand what was happening. At least I'd like to tell you what I was able to experience there. First of all, it may not be a very popular opinion, but the departure of the American troops in the 30th or the 31st of August of this year was something that was already in the books. It was only something that was put forward, if you like, something that was already planned, because the Americans had already announced that they were going to leave at the end of August. They had planned it. They declared this the year previous. But it was nothing more than the final chapter of the international community's promise that had gone on for 20 years, which was a failure. And that's why it's interesting for us here, because it allows us to ask us the question, how can we really get back to peace, and ask ourselves the questions, how did we get to this point? First of all, let's look at the conditions that led to the situation in Afghanistan. This started after a horrible terrorist attack in the United States. No Afghan authority had given us the authority to go there. I don't think there was any UN resolution that permitted it. Yes, there was one. And we had one or two objectives. Firstly, to fight against Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. And on the other hand, we were trying to restore or install, if you like, a democracy. It was, at first glance, the rule of law. So before installing a democracy, it was more the idea of putting in place the rule of law. These were the goals, actually. At the beginning, during the first years, we had successes. At the very beginning, we had a democratically elected president. And one of the great successes was that there were more women in the Afghan parliament than in the French parliament. But not only that, there was increased education for young Afghan boys and girls. We also saw the reopening of theaters and cinemas in Kabul. And we saw that a military intervention was going hand in hand with the creation of a rule of law that the international community and the Afghans wanted. And then from 2005 to 2006, we saw that this started to disintegrate a little bit, which led to a few evolutions. We saw that NATO took over the operations, in the military operations, through their FIAS. And we also saw that the military involvement became larger and larger. And ladies and gentlemen, these military interventions in Afghanistan became enormous. There were more than 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. I can still remember the day when I was at the Kandahar base, army base, and I saw the lines of helicopters, tens, hundreds of helicopters, which made me think about another tragedy of the 20th century, which was the Vietnam War and Apocalypse Now. So we saw these military interventions and promises which were becoming bigger and bigger, and which allowed us to get to conquer territory here and territory there. But at the end of the day, the rule of law did not become the norm, and there was war and insurrection that was becoming more and more present. And we had to actually ask the question, what are we going to do? At that time, we remembered a theory that had become a little bit archaic at the time. It was called the theory of counterinsurrection. Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama also spoke about them. These were following documents published by Galula. And in concrete terms, and military intervention, when it becomes a permanent intervention, it starts to actually counter-create what it had initially hoped to create. And also it's a factory of opponents, if you like, and those who are opposing the military intervention. So, for example, once we killed or got rid of a Taliban fighter, unfortunately, we created 20 more because of their family members, their close friends who wanted to get revenge for this assassination or the murder. We also saw that the military interventions became more and more violent. Of course, a war is violent by nature, but they were becoming more and more violent. But each time a military intervention becomes permanent, the players respect less and less the ethical rules of war. And at the end of the day, we create these conditions in which the actual populations reject your presence. So this led to the situation that started to take place in 2010, 2012. And there were other questions that had to be asked. Why did we never put together or help create an Afghan army, despite the enormous training efforts? Why did we not create an Afghan police force, despite the enormous efforts that we had employed there. Why had we not put together various components of the rule of law in this country? Why is it that after billions and billions of bombs have dropped, why is it that after military interventions which became much more controversial, why is it that the civilians had to pay the bill with their lives for this intervention? We have to remember that many NATO interventions had also, by ricochet, hurt or killed civil citizens. So it was impossible to succeed. Why could we not succeed? We also have to ask ourselves, why could we accept regimes such as that in Afghanistan, which were extremely corrupt, filling the pockets of their leaders? However, at the end of the day, we accepted and even helped in putting together a kleptocracy, which was the Karzai president. How could we have done this? At least I wanted to tell you what I saw, what I experienced, and what I may have think following debates and discussions. Yes, it's true that we helped to reconstruct villages. Yes, we financed agriculture. Yes, we financed education. Yes, we financed Galula in his theory, which was to create a transition from war to the rule of law. But at the end of the day, we didn't succeed in what we had wanted to do. However, I'm going to give you the answer why we did not succeed. Firstly, we put together models, and I'm sorry to say this, these are ethnocentric models. We put together models that try to show that democracy and a Western constitution was something that could be put together in a few years. Here in the West, we had to go through centuries to really come to the final stage of democracy and constitution. Russia is a good example of this. Russia is a big country, old country that is still not a democracy. And when we go look at Afghanistan, which has actually never been a democracy, it was a republic, of course, when it was part of the Soviet Union. How can we see that in a country that is rife with tribes, ripe with ethnicities and minorities in various provinces, how do you think we can quite simply impose the Western model on such a country? So I think this was the first mistake, was to refuse or to quite simply disregard the construction of a country with the rule of law, totally in complete disregard of the local culture and the local models that were already there. And of course, the second reason that we did not succeed, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, of course we have to keep in mind the neighbors, because on one side we have Pakistan, on the other side Iran, and also you have to think that China is a major player in this area. Of course, it's very difficult to put together a country that is defined by peace and stability. Third reason, and I'd like to look at this briefly, it's very well explained in the two articles, Bertrand and Nicole. The big error is that when we think that lethal and military power will create security and stability, to think that hard power will be able to create a safe country, you're wrong to think this. It's quite simply a total lack of humility. At the end of the day, if you're to look at the last 30 years, we always went into various countries with hard military power, thinking that military power would be able to create a country of peace and security, and each time it was a complete disaster. It was a disaster in Iraq. It was a mistake in Afghanistan. And I think we will also not succeed in Mali in the way that we will not have success in Mali, because we will not be able to create in Mali a country with the rule of law that is secure and stable. So these are the same situations, which meaning the total destruction of what we have created, and at the end of the day, the departure of the military troops, be it the French military troops in Mali. I'd like to quite simply look at the various television programs that were saying it was scandalous, the departure of the Americans in Afghanistan. I don't think we can say anything to the Americans when we ourselves had left Afghanistan 8 years earlier. There were various caveats that were in place in Afghanistan over the various years, not only for France, but also the Americans and other countries. It means we had to put together the minimum amount of risks for the NATO fighters in Afghanistan at the time. But at the end of the day, this is the crux of the matter. We have to really create these countries with stability and peace through soft power, rather than quite simply imposing our history, imposing our culture on these countries that are totally different. And I think it will allow us to really achieve success in our projects at the end of the day, to get a more stable system in place. A last thing that I'd like to say: what is Europe's role in all of this? This will be my conclusion. All of various ministers and prime ministers here in France have tried to put together a model of European defense, European security and defense policy, which will allow us to propagate our messages. It will allow us to show a model that is totally unique in the world, but without giving the necessary resources to allow us to do this. And this is something that we have to look at. And when we look at the Australian submarine questions, at one day or the other, will we actually take our own destiny in our own hands? It's kind of like the person who is in love with someone who has been dumped by the person that they love, and the person who thinks one day or another, my beloved will come back to me. But we have to keep in mind that the United States considers that the most important strategic geographical space is the Indo-Pacific region, and it's not here the Atlantic region. This is not their main point of interest right now. And that will force us, Europeans, we are an economic power, that we have to really look at things as they are. We cannot be in a role of submission. We cannot refuse to quite simply take on our own defense questions. Instead of being in a type of wishy-washy behavior, we have to quite simply accept the idea that we have to look after our own security, our own defense, and then we have to bring our values forward, not only in our foreign affairs as a European body, but also our security questions from the European perspective. And when we look at the Afghan question and the departure of the Americans, will the Europeans accept, at least, or at the very least, will they refuse to be quite simply dwarfs in the question of foreign policy, or will we be the ones who step up to the bat and actually take on this question to put together solid policies for defense and security? So the question here in Afghanistan is very cruel. It's horrible, especially for these women, especially when we look at the question of human rights. But we have to ask other questions. How can we try to put together a model in which we refuse to really look after the valuable ideas? in a model in which we quite simply ignore the fact that tanks and guns will put in place models that we hope, and then we put together models that development comes forward after dialogue. And I would like to thank everyone for coming here over these past 2 days to take part in these debates. And it allows us to understand why we were not successful in Afghanistan, and we will each time not be successful if we use this same model. Thank you very much.
Merci, cher Hervé.
Thank you, dear Hervé, for this opening address. Well, he was the French ambassador in Afghanistan since September 2018, and he witnessed minute after minute the fall of Kabul. He's here to tell us about the role of France for and in Afghanistan. Please give a warm welcome to David Martineau, French ambassador in Afghanistan. President, dear Hervé, ladies and gentlemen. Hervé, thank you for inviting me. You called me right after I came back to France, and I enjoyed this invitation. I really thank you for inviting me. I listened to you carefully. In fact, I don't know what to add after your address, because you said everything that I think, or nearly everything that I think. So that's a good thing, because I hadn't written a speech. So what I can do is to continue the story that Hervé started telling us, and tell you in this way that the analysis, the diagnosis you made became true in the next 10 years. When I arrived in Afghanistan in autumn 2018, President Trump had already given his instructions to his administration and to the ambassador to prepare the withdrawal of the United States. And in fact, this discussion is going on, is difficult. It's not the first time that the Americans are talking about withdrawing from the country, because Obama had promised to end endless wars, in particular the war in Afghanistan. He made a tactical mistake, though, because he gave a date, a deadline, and of course, according to what people say in Afghanistan, where people say you have watchers and we have time. Well, of course, the Obama administration attempted to start negotiating and include the authorities. And, well, the Taliban refused, and the choice was made not to start these discussions. So the Trump administration made another choice and decided to talk with the insurgents and exclude the authorities. And this changes the approach completely. The agreement, which became the Doha Agreement, was ready to be signed in September 2019. It's And President Trump decided not to approve this agreement because there was an attack that led to the death of an American soldier. So it became unthinkable for the American leadership to continue along those lines. And it shows the hubris of the Talib insurgency to think that they could continue killing Americans when they were about to sign an agreement. Well, the French services understood what this agreement involved and thought that it was a bad agreement and that it was not a peace agreement. It was a withdrawal agreement, a safe passage agreement, an agreement in which on the one hand you had very fuzzy agreements that were impossible to check on the Talib side, and on the American and international side, because the Americans were negotiating for everybody, for the whole coalition, without everybody exactly knowing what was going on. But still, on the American side, you had clear, precise, and dated commitments. So in the end, this agreement was signed in Doha in February 2020, and from that time on, from that moment on, you said, Hervé, that we could forecast what was going to happen, and I can confirm this. In fact, when I arrived there in 2018, I could see exactly the situation that you described, which was a situation of status quo, that had been a status quo for the past 10 years. War was raging since 2002, 3, 4, with the Taliban's winning and then losing, but with no strategic advantage. And this status quo was already a failure. So when the world learned about this agreement, well, to me, it seemed obvious that it would go to its logical conclusion, and that we had to be prepared for that. At the end of the first lockdown in September 2020, I talked with the French authorities and said there are several possible scenarios in the country, but the most likely one is a full victory of the Taliban when the Americans withdraw. And I told the French authorities, that if we needed to evacuate, I didn't want to leave everybody behind and do what happened in the past and leave our colleagues behind. And the response of the French authorities was very encouraging, because they said yes. They said yes, we're getting prepared to do exactly that. So we started our security planning, and we started giving information to Paris as early as September 2020. Then our Afghan partners, our Afghan friends, and a large part of the international community were denying the situation. Nobody believes this, because the Americans and the international community had been there for the last 20 years, and everybody thought, well, they will stay in a way or another, they will leave a counterterrorism force there. And people were telling me, you'll see, with Biden everything will change, because the presidential campaign had started in the US, and, well, people were saying, with Biden we'll go back to a classical relationship between NATO, the US, and Afghanistan. And I kept saying it will be the same with Biden, because Biden expressed his intent concerning Afghanistan very early in the campaign. He also wanted to put an end to the American wars, and well, he was a senator heading the Committee for Foreign Relations in 2009, and then he came back as vice president. And he was against Obama when Obama decided the surge to increase the boots on the ground required by the Pentagon. And, well, President Trump at the same time was continuing his strategic withdrawal operation, and the number of American soldiers was really going down too much, and the level was not acceptable. So either they had to increase the number of soldiers or continue in the same way. But, well, the French at the same time were working on their withdrawal as well. Destruction of equipment, evacuation of French people there. And when President Biden confirmed his intention to withdraw from Afghanistan, not on May the 1st, but on September 11, early in September, it confirmed what I had always thought, that if they could not meet that deadline in May the 1st, which was planned in the agreement, even though it took place later, well, it would happen. And that's when we started planning. And I remember saying that in the worst case scenario, well, there would be 45 days between the time when the last American soldier left and the fall of the Republic. And if you look at the timing, at the timeline, it's exactly what happened. When Biden announced withdrawal in September, General Miller, who was commanding the troops there in Afghanistan, well, he started thinking in terms of logistic maneuver, logistic reduction, tactical withdrawal. He was a very good soldier, so he planned for withdrawal in July, which is exactly what happened. In July, there were no longer any foreign troops in the country, except at the airport in Kabul. There were a few hundred GIs and also a few GIs protecting the U.S. Embassy. At the same time, we were preparing our own operations. We were evacuating our Afghan colleagues from the embassy, from the French Institute, from the archaeological delegation between May the 20th and June the 27th. France and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs set up a special flight in mid-July to evacuate French citizens. It wasn't used very much, because it was still a time when a lot of French people or French Afghan people were coming back to France anyway for the summer holidays to be with their families, because they knew that it would not end well. And all this, my point is that we could forecast all this. Now, was it avoidable? No. As Hervé explained very well, when the American leadership decided to withdraw, it was inevitable. And we drew three conclusions from that: that the Americans would leave, that they would leave on the day they had announced, or not much later. And as you said, dear Hervé, that from the time the Americans left, no other foreign troops could stay in Afghanistan. You explained very well how incomplete European defense is. And we saw that when the Americans withdrew their aircraft, their transport aircraft in particular, all the critical functions that allow a military force to stay on a foreign theater, intelligence, including in its technical dimension, and the deterrence that the American forces represented, nobody else could stay, no other country could stay. So the large contingents that were still there, the Germans, the British, the Italians, in different parts of Afghanistan also had to leave. And they did it. They did not appreciate the fact that they had to leave at the time that they hadn't planned for, maybe too quickly, in a way that they had not planned. And one of the lessons we can probably learn from the Afghan experience, it is that as long as Europe does not have the enablers, the capabilities to carry out some critical military functions, we will be in the same situation that you described, the lover that is abandoned by the person that he loves. And the third condition was that, well, without a foreign presence, the Afghan Republic could not last. Every year, since the spring 2019, we've been doing an analysis of the condition of the Afghan army or armed forces, and we always reach the same conclusion. Without foreign forces, it cannot last for 1 year, and we even reduced this time in our assessment. And once again, what we saw is that in Afghanistan, it's always the worst-case situation that happens. This is what took place over the summer, and very often this worst-case scenario happens quicker than we thought. Now, you mentioned David Galula, and you were right. to do so. When Galula wrote Counterinsurgency Theory and Practice, we were in 1963 during the Algerian War. And when you read this book, you understand that Afghanistan has all the conditions, shows all the conditions for an inexorable victory of the insurgency, except for one condition, maybe. Galula describes the fact that one of the strong points of insurgency is to be popular. And I don't think the Taliban are popular. I think that if they want to participate in free elections one day, well, they will get 12 or 16% of the votes, maybe more in some regions, in the Pashtun regions in particular, in the north sometimes as well. We were surprised to see that the insurgents had roots in some other regions that are not Pashtun regions, in Tajik and Uzbek regions in particular. But apart from their lack of popularity, well, the insurgents, the insurgency met all the conditions to win in Afghanistan with a mechanism that you describe very well, in particular, which I can describe as follows. Counterinsurgency can give results, but if it is led by a foreign force, well, but it's the Afghan force that was fighting with the U.S. supporting them as well as other countries. But if a foreign force is present in a country, well, it creates antibodies in the country's society. And this is exactly what happened. And that's why the problem was impossible to solve, because at the same time we had to build an Afghan force to hand over to it, to make it possible for this Afghan force to fight the insurgency and to really build the rule of law. And at the same time, you had to have time to enable them to learn and to build up. Well, the American military forces wanted 2 more years, the Afghans wanted 10 more years, but it wouldn't have changed anything. Now, there was progress, in particular regarding women, education of girls, and the Afghans can be proud of that. The press was free for a time and freer than in any other country in Central Asia. But regarding the rest, we have to rethink about what we can do there. We did not create a sustainable economy. We created a dividend economy, and we have to learn lessons from that. Now, what about the future? Well, it's not promising. Girls are not going to school any longer. It's been 13 days now that girls can't go to school. Yesterday, I heard the absurd intervention of a Talib leader who was defining the conditions in which women can go out in Kabul, no colored clothes, they can't smell good, they can't wear shoes that make noise, because the noise of women's shoes attract young men. I'm not making up anything. I'm not inventing anything. So the future looks very dark. We are trying to continue extracting people from Afghanistan. But honestly, the situation is very difficult right now. It's very difficult to negotiate with the Taliban. And the question is whether we will have to go back to Kabul at some point in time, and the international community has set very stringent conditions, and I hope that we will continue to agree on these conditions, that the consensus will remain, because otherwise we will have failed, in particular regarding respect of human rights, respect of women's rights, free circulation of Afghans, creation of a more inclusive government. Right now there's an interim government. Yes, it's true, but as you said, Hervé, we see that the lion's share goes to those who were always close to Pakistan. The Afghani network gets the lion's share compared with others, the Kandaharis in particular, that form the biggest battalions of the insurgency. You have 33 members in the government, 2 Tajiks, 1 Uzbek. So it's not true that the Talib movement represents the whole society, the whole Afghan society. It's not true. 95% of the movement is Pashtun, even though the north of the country gave them some support. And of course, we need to be very strict as to the conditions that were set. Now, regarding the evacuation process over the summer, well, we'll have to tell that story someday, only to pay tribute to those who took risks, physical risks, and we can't mention their names because they're policemen or military men, and they were working at the airport, at the checkpoints. They were diplomats as well there, and they did everything they could, and to help those who were really at risk, who were endangered in Kabul. And I think that from that point of view, our operation was a success. Thank you, my dear Hervé, again for your invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
L'Afghanistan, c'est
38 million people in Afghanistan, of which 20 million women. Their daily lives are more and more defined by darkness. And this is even worse considering the fact that in 2001 we created hope. We've spoken a lot this morning. Tens, hundreds of billions of euros spent, but now we're going back to the starting blocks that were symbolically very horrible, especially following 9/11. Indignation, resignation, helplessness. Are there other words that you can define this situation? That's the question that we're going to ask the Shakiba Hashemi, the first woman to be a diplomat for the new government in Afghanistan in 2001. She was also the founder of the Afghan Association for Freedom, and she also worked for Commandant Massoud to foster education of women in Afghanistan. Diplomat, military, writer. Her words are very precious. Please give a round of applause. And we see that she will be accompanied by Bertrand Badi, who's a professor in Sciences Po. Please give science politics in Paris. Please give a round of applause.
Vous avez besoin qu'on soit avec ça. Ok, très bien. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for being here today for this roundtable discussion. So as I just said, I said 3 words, and I'd like to ask you the same question to both of you, and you can answer as you wish, of course. Indignation, resignation, helplessness. Do you think that these are proper words to sum up the situation in Afghanistan today? Shakiba, you can, of course, start. In Afghanistan, what is killing today would be the wise one, so of course, that should be you. Helplessness? No, I don't think so, because I see today, good day, good morning to everyone. Thank you very much. It's a symbolic place where I am right now, so I'm very happy to be here. Helplessness? No, I don't think so, because I always say that because We are just the tip of the iceberg. But when you see women protesting, even 2 days ago, 3 days ago, there was photographers who were taking pictures of them, and he was assassinated. No, I don't think they're helpless. I don't think we can use that word, because we could quite simply use it and then sit back and do nothing. And when I hear the emotion in your voice, when I think maybe indignation, maybe the right word, yes. We'll talk about it more in detail later. But let's remember the justice that has to be done, or the injustice in this situation right now, because we have heard a lot about this. It's very interesting. We've been hearing about it for the last 20 years. We heard that Afghanistan will become the worldwide terrorist factory. Of course, I feel indignation because when the Taliban entered Kabul, they freed jihadi prisoners, thousands of prisoners who had done criminal acts beforehand, 20 or so nationalities. Yes, of course, I feel indignation because of not only indignation for what happened between 1996 to 2001, but it's not only for Afghan people, but for everyone in the world. And we think about the Bataclan terrorist acts. When you give the keys over to terrorists of a country, because this is what actually we're doing, not only to the Taliban, but also to ISIS in the north of Afghanistan. What will it be? Will it be the factory for tomorrow's terrorists here in Europe? And I say here at this place because I think about this because it's really anchored in my memory. The 5th of April 2001, a few months before 9/11, the Commandant Massoud was in Strasbourg, said, if you do not come in, the Afghan people are fighting against terrorism in Afghanistan. This was a few months before 9/11. It will come to your country. That's what he said. So 20 years later, I have to repeat exactly the same thing. Mr. Badi, do you think that this idea that it's over, we're helpless, do you also agree with this? Well, when you say it's over, what do you mean? When you say helplessness, which helplessness? You know, for centuries, but especially over the last decades, we've been wearing rather tinted glasses when we look at the world, especially concerning world outside of the borders of the European Union. We looked at it as not as an object, but as a subject. Afghanistan, we've seen it as a strategic object in which the British and the Russians played the end games, or the last end games in their confrontations during the Cold War. And then we saw it as a type of cleavage point between the West and the Soviet Union. And then we saw it as a way to somehow get the hold upon the Soviet Union, or the USSR, at the time when the USSR was reigning over Afghanistan. And now we look at it as a way to somehow get the hand up on the various regional powers. But we rarely speak about Afghan society. I was very happy when Frédérique spoke about it previously. First thing that Afghanistan is 38 million human beings. And I didn't hear this morning that 1/3 of those 38 million people are hungry. I'm not saying this. This is the United Nations that is saying this. 50% of Afghan children are malnourished. The the maternal death rate is so high that it's higher than in Yemen. So the Afghan society is not only Kabul. It's a rural society that is quite simply disintegrating. The researcher, which we talk about a lot, did a really good research paper, and she said she wanted to show to what point this country has disintegrated. So we always speak about Afghanistan in strategic geopolitical terms. But the social suffering, which is one of the main motors of history, and this is the crux of the matter in Afghanistan. And when we know that 95% of the American expenditures in Afghanistan were given to defense, or shall we say, to attacking Afghanistan, and only 5% remains, 50% of which is for the tips, in other terms, corruption. So we see that the end of the game has never actually happened. And who can actually play this game? Of course, there's social multilateralism, which could happen. But the majority of the containment issue was done by the Western countries, and this has not allowed us to really go into detail and work on the question. So, the end of the game, have we already gone through it? I don't know, maybe it will come now. The other question is military helplessness or military power, or the helplessness of military power. I'm not the one who can really talk about this too much because my origins are not far from Afghanistan. But I think that it's true that the Taliban humiliate women, and this is an atrocious drama. And so let's talk about it openly. When we look at it from the Eurocentric point of view, I think we really have to change our perspective. Of course, experts say that 97% of the Afghan population could be quickly below the poverty level. So the situation for the Afghan people, will this be a way for the Taliban to really come and really maintain power? Or on the other hand, will it be the source of an insurrection to really put the end to the Taliban situation and rule in Afghanistan? So what will be the impact of this question on the Afghan situation? We're talking about food, health, etc. Of course, we did have some type of hope during 20 years. I'd like to remind you that when I talk with a lot of young people, there are young people in 25 years old in Afghanistan who have been educated, who have never really known the Taliban. So right away, boom, it falls on their head. And you see, the ones who really know about the Taliban are people about my age, especially when you keep in mind that the life expectancy is about 42 to 45 in Afghanistan. For people of my age, they say it's impossible that we go through this again. Today, in Afghanistan, 70% of the Afghan society is in the various provinces, and 70% of them actually have a salary and bring bread back to the home. So if these women are not allowed to leave the house, if they're not allowed to work, the women are not allowed to work as civil servants, it's a very clear situation. How will these women who are supporting the family, how will they be able to support the family? How will these families survive? It's something we have to talk about right now. It's very important. I know that the organizations are talking about the health and food questions, the basic questions in Afghanistan. None of us can really give our opinion concerning about this, especially considering that many people are dying today. More than 20 million people are under the poverty line. People are dying of hunger. So we have to help these people. There are organizations who are working in Afghanistan, as they do in other parts of the world, to bring basic help to these people. This is their job. But what you can't forget is that please keep in mind that in this country over the past 20 years, since my birth, Afghanistan is at war. How many times has the brain drain happened? Diasporas, how many people have immigrated to Germany, for example? Will these people come back? How will they put the country back together? How will they really refill or recreate the brain drain that has gone out? How is it that these 70% of the population that is supported by women, how will they put the country back together? What we can't forget, we've spoken about governments in the past. You know it, Mr. Bertrand. The government who has been announced, 14 of which have been in Guantanamo. One minister is on the FBI most wanted list. What will this mean for small children and women? These are policy questions that we have to keep in mind. So if we look at the situation from very small flashpoints, we often forget the big picture. So I think it's important to look at something. And you look at the world situation. Afghanistan was always the center of many wars that didn't have much to do with Afghan people, etc. After the Soviet war, we created various terrorists. The West created bin Laden. When the Soviets left Afghanistan, we quite simply abandoned Afghanistan. I think it's important to know this because many young people are interested in history. All of the geopolitical theater takes place in Afghanistan. The Soviets left, the Berlin Wall falls, they abandoned Afghanistan. There are no social media, everything was closed after the Taliban came in, and everybody said it was a purely Afghan question. But we knew that it was the Emirates, the Gulf Emirates and Pakistan, that were really behind all of the things that were happening in Afghanistan. 9/11 was a big moment, but also the assassination of Commander Massoud was a big thing for us. But we also have to think, how was it that we can help Afghanistan? Let's look at current history. First woman diplomat appointed by Mr. Karzai. I participated in all of these negotiation roundtables, and we talked about reconstructing the country. Everything that we've been talking about today, Mr. Morin also. But the reconstruction of the country, we promised to the Afghans that they would cooperate with the Americans, with NATO, with ISAF. 20 years later, nobody asked, what happened to all these promises? What happened to the signatures? We know. It didn't work, and they abandoned us again. So what will happen tomorrow? These agreements that were signed in Doha, the peace agreements, nobody asked what happened. What happened? I'm sure in the agreement it was written down what will happen if we don't abide by the agreements. And we forget the fact that there are millions and millions of people who are victims of these agreements and the abandonment. Of course, it wasn't for the Afghan women that the militaries intervened in Afghanistan. It was because of 9/11. So what are we waiting for? Nobody really speaks about Pakistan too much because they have the nuclear bomb. And about all the other countries that there was no military success in Iraq, for example. So what about ISIS? Where are they? We're going to let the country become a type of laboratory. We'll analyze it. We'll forget about the 20 million women and all the people who are suffering. But the population here today cannot say we did not know this. I am 47 years old, and I was there 20 years ago, and I participated in the signing of these agreements. I am still alive. And we always say that history never repeats itself, only in Afghanistan it does. So we will once again abandon the people. It will shock the women who are here today because we know that we're trying to bring women working for our organization to bring them here, but they still can't leave Afghanistan. I am part of a network of 27 French NGOs in Afghanistan. We could not board these planes. It was a horrible situation. But the most horrible image that I still cry about are these women who are throwing their babies over the walls. And we saw the American soldiers who were lifting these children up very cautiously. And when we see the last soldier who who boarded the plane, and at that moment, when the last soldier boarded the airplane, we totally forgot about 37 million Afghans. What's going to happen with all these people? Yes, France is the fifth country. France is the fifth largest economy in the world. But can we absorb here in France 2,600 refugees? Is it possible? But what about the 38 million other people? They're in Afghanistan. There are people who have had access to education, social services. 11th of August of this year, a woman who is here today was doing a Skype meeting with 300 women who were talking about solar panels and virtual realities and digital programming. I see them every day, 25-year-old women. What happens with all these people when the intervention is over? We forget about it, we abandon it, let's look at other topics. And then we'll look at Mali. But it's only for those who are interested in it. History, geopolitical question. Bertrand, all of you know about this. The entire world's questions are finding their centerpiece here in Afghanistan, and this for the last 40 years. But I just have to not go beat around the bush. There are still 38 million people suffering in Afghanistan.
Voilà, chez Keba.
Chez Keba, you have had vibrant words. You represent the spirit of this forum. Here we do not accept to draw the curtain on human beings that are suffering, that are in pain. We want to keep hope in our guts. And the question we need to ask ourselves now is how we will be able to help you to move on to the next step. It's a huge question. We do not pretend to solve it. We don't pretend to have the solution, but we'll continue following closely the situation. Bertrand, do you want to add a last comment? We know we won't find a solution right away, but at least we're here. We observe what is going on. We analyze the situation, and we're trying to think about something else for the future. Bertrand, well, I think we've said everything with our hearts and minds as well. So I don't think I should add anything. Maybe to echo François-Xavier's question, social suffering never brings about anything good. And it always makes the most violent and radical movement successful. We have to recognize that our geostrategy, if we should call it like this, has always ignored social suffering, especially when it was not part of geopolitics, or it has addressed it with charity. But you have to understand that in all situations, and there are no exceptions, when a society is in pain, is suffering, it's always the most intolerant and violent movements that win. It's always the most radical movements that benefit from that. So if we should learn only one lesson from the tragedy you're suffering from, it is that power should stop playing with social suffering, with the suffering of people, and just consider it as part of what is happening. No. If we want to show common sense, we should remedy that suffering to make sure that it's not going to explode. Because if it explodes, we're going to suffer from some of the fallout. I'm saying this to try and win over everybody's indifference. Well, Western Europe understood in the 19th century that, you had to help the poorest in different countries so that they do not become dangerous, and we saw that with reactionary movements like Bismarckism, Bismarck's movement, etc. Thank you. Bertrand, Hashemi, one last word. Yes, I'd like to conclude with some optimistic words. The Afghan people remains standing, and we have a sense of humor in Afghanistan. In the worst moments, we always find a joke. Now, some days ago, there was a demonstration in Kabul. And, Frédérique was saying very rightly that the Taliban are the same ones as in 96, 2001. But the world has changed. We have social media. We have Facebook. They haven't been prohibited everywhere except in Panjshir, in the Panjshir Valley. And so I was with Nouria a few days ago, and she was sharing on WhatsApp about her demonstration on her phone, and I heard some shooting, some firings, and I said, you have to go back home. And I told her, you've asked us to create women's associations, schools, training centers for 20 years now. Do you think I'm going to be afraid of a few bullets? And she said, I'm not going to go through what I've been through again, so don't tell me to go back home. So I hung up. I was afraid. I wanted her to stop using her phone, and I wanted to finish with this because a lot of young people send us emails, and they are motivated to help young Afghan people. They are trying to set up e-learning courses, and I would like to thank all these young people in France who are helping us, supporting us. And Bertrand Badi, to answer your question, these people, these women, these girls, they're afraid of nothing, not even hunger or death. We would prefer to die, but we want to stand up. We'll die on our feet, like Nouria. We are not afraid. Now, we cannot give up. You all study globalization. You've seen that the pandemic was global. What we are interested in is other human beings. Let's try to stop being blind to what is going on elsewhere or deaf. Let's try to maintain and preserve human rights, democracy, the right to education, basic health. Everybody is entitled to that. All women are entitled to that everywhere in the world. Thank you very much. Thank you, Shekeba, Hashemi, and Bertrand Badi, for your very moving testimony.
Shekeba.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. very much again. And well, we've understood now that Afghanistan is everybody's business. We cannot just be satisfied with declarations of intent. And the fact that the Taliban have come back to power, well, we cannot draw a curtain on that, on Afghanistan's culture, on Afghanistan's true face. And of course, we are very modest, but with all its modesty, the Normandy region and its president, Hervé Morin, wants to do its share and help this Afghan culture to continue to live outside of the country. Now, to explain to you what the Normandy Initiative for Afghan Culture is, let's welcome together Senator of Seine-Maritime, Regional Councillor in Normandy and Chairperson of the Culture Commission, Catherine Morin-Desailly. Welcome, dear Catherine. When we talked about these 38 million Afghans who are remaining in the country and those who have been repatriated at the end of the summer. And amongst the Afghan personalities that have escaped their country, there are artists, journalists, lawyers who were risking death if they were staying in their country. Several of these personalities are here in Normandy. Catherine, can you tell us more about the Normandy Initiative in favor of Afghan culture? Thank you, François-Xavier. I'm very, very moved, still very much affected by what Shekeba Hashemi said. We can never forget that we cannot let the curtain fall on these 38 million Afghan men and women who are still in their country in horrible conditions. Now, this Normandy Initiative was an idea of cultural players in Normandy. Well, on August 15th, last summer, when the Taliban arrived in Kabul, well, we started providing support. We have fantastic cultural players in Normandy, and the whole network showed its engagement, its motivation, and well, I'll mention some names later on, but they got engaged at a very early stage when they saw the potential threat that female Afghan artists, when they saw the risk that they would be subject to try and invite them to spend a residence here in Normandy to work on our stages and our theaters with French artists. But of course, the arrival of the Taliban in Kabul, came too early. We hadn't planned for that, and we couldn't give them a visa early enough, but we created a chain of solidarity with the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, with the presidency, the French presidency, and of course, David Martineau, the French embassy, helped us a great deal. And the civil society also got involved because they were fighting for peace and providing support to France's action. But, well, all this was very difficult for the Afghan women, and they could only reach the airport and be repatriated on August 23rd, and they were able to board airplanes provided by France. Now, they went to different regions of France, in Normandy, of course, but also in the north of France, in the south of France, in Lyon, Marseille, etc., etc. So now we have about 20 artists with us in Normandy. They've been welcomed in Vire, in the National Drama Center in Vire, Normandy, in Rouen as well. There are 4 artists in Rouen. There are some other artists in Caen, and I'd like to greet Jacques Peignet, who is here with us. There's also the Évreux-Louviers National Stage that welcomes a number of artists, and so on and so forth. So now there is something very important that we still need to do. Well, it is to make sure that they remain in touch through the world cultural artistic community. And it's important for us, for the Normandy region, to defend cultural rights, everybody's cultural rights, and the ability for everybody to continue creating and to continue working and making a living with culture. Well, there is a UNESCO initiative that is very important, and we talked about, we heard Elaha Sonor, who explained how she wanted to make music when she was a teenager, and it was forbidden. Her uncle was threatening to kill her, and she resisted. She saw that she had no other choice than to escape, to flee. And there is also 2 Afghan artists in our network, Miriam and another woman, and we are really welcoming them with all our heart to Normandy. Congratulations to all of you, and welcome. There's a number of cultural institutions in Normandy that are engaged to welcome Afghan refugees. One of them is Tangram. It's a public institution for cultural cooperation, managing the National Évreux-Louviers stage in the Eure department. Valérie Baron, you are representing Tangram. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Hello, Valérie Baron. You are Tangram's director in charge of the Évreux-Louviers National Stage. Can you tell us shortly, briefly, what it means for a Normandy cultural institution to welcome Afghan artists for 1 year as residents? I would like to say a few words about the fact that, this seemed obvious to us. There are a few of us in the audience. Some of my colleagues are here. Well, there is in the Vosges, in France, a small wooden theater called the Theater of People, and its motto is for humankind through art for humankind. And I believe that these few words sum up perfectly what is our motivation. So when we thought that we could welcome artists that were really in a very dangerous situation in Afghanistan, it was obvious for us that we wanted to welcome them because, theater is the stage of human passions. We explore history, but we're rooted in the present. And we really wanted to welcome those artists because, as I explained, they were in danger. And we hear that some artists were destroying their own work to avoid being in too much danger because the Taliban's go knock on doors to find people, to kill people, to destroy their work. And, we wanted to open up to the world. I was very much moved by what Shekeba Hashemi said, as we all were. And she explained very well that what is at the heart of what we do, of our job, is the human side, human beings. And artists echo that, echo culture, and artists help men and women change themselves, develop. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we can all give you a very big round of applause for welcoming artists in residence. Now, to conclude this sequence where there are artists but also lawyers and journalists that have come to France. So I would like to welcome Asad Kosha, who is a journalist and the editor-in-chief of an English-speaking online newspaper, to join us on stage. Asad Kosha, welcome. Here, take a microphone. Asad Kosha speaks English, so yes, he can listen to the interpretation if he's putting on a headset. Asad Kosha, you're a journalist, you're editor-in-chief of Kabul Now, an online newspaper. You've worked for a long time with international organizations in Afghanistan. You arrived in Normandy a few weeks ago. What is the message you would like to convey today?
Thank you. I have come a long way from Afghanistan, and it is really an honor and a privilege to be here today for having me. I'm sad to say that I don't have a happy story. I have a very sad story to tell. The Taliban captured Afghanistan and I escaped. I managed to escape, but the entire population are left alone over there. When I arrived here in Paris, David Bouby, a French artist, a gentleman, came over there to welcome us. He asked me to participate in the forum, and I agreed. At the very beginning, the organizers here, they asked me to share my experience, my own story at the forum, but later then they changed and asked me to talk about peace. Today I would like to talk about the dynamics of war and peace in Afghanistan, and a little bit about the geopolitics of war in Afghanistan. And please don't hesitate asking me any question. I would try my best to answer your questions relating to the topic. And thank you for having me again.
Merci.
We're going to ask you one question maybe because the program will continue. We'll be together until 1 o'clock. Now, this is my question. In this very dark landscape, do you see a ray of hope today?
Of course, when there is hope, there is life. I personally believe we live with hope, and we every day we wake up with hope. And whenever there is oppression and there is resistance, and I'm sure, yes, the resistance will continue, and yeah, the Taliban will not win, and one day we will kick them out, and we together. I'm hopeful, and I would like to send this message to my countrymen that yes, we should never ever lose hope, and hope is like oxygen. It is, and now more than ever, what we need is hope, and we have to be hopeful and resilient as ever. And
Mélanie.
Yeah.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think it would be very interesting to go forward with this. We've also asked you questions about villages, the Village for Peace. I think about the Studio Agora West France here, which is not far. I think it would be interesting to really go into this debate, really exchange a lot. I'm very happy to welcome you here in Normandy. I'm very happy that you are continuing to allow the real face of Afghanistan to be seen for Afghan culture. Please, thank you very much for being here and for telling us about Afghan culture and your works. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, thank you. I think that the few words that Assad Kosha just said, we can see really the spirit, the Afghan spirit that Madame Shekeba spoke about. It's calm, you don't give up on anything, and it shows, Mr. Kosha has showed us that Afghanistan really is moving forward with its hope. And Afghanistan will also be spoken about next week during the Calvados Normandy Bayeux Prize. It will be Monday, 4th of October to the 10th of October, and there'll be a prize evening which will take place next Saturday at 6 o'clock. So let's keep going with what we started with yesterday morning. We answered a very difficult question. Why is peace not attainable? So the next part, how can we really retake the peace and really move forward with it? And I think only one woman can speak about this. She works with Bertrand Badi. She organizes the scientific side of this forum. So please, Nicole, you said 10 minutes. Please come up onto the stage and discuss with us. Thank you very much. I really admired Mr. Hervé Morin, who was able to jump up onto the stage without using the stairway. I'm not able to do it, unfortunately, any longer, but I'm very happy to be here this moment today, and I'm somewhat intimidated because we've already spoken about humility here. I'm very intimidated to present this speech after this very passionate meeting that we've had and the very hopeless discussions that we've had about Afghanistan. So students, ladies and gentlemen, you have gone through a horrible experience, and it's a very extraordinary experience because you have to think about how can we think about peace in geopolitical terms. And I think we really have to remember this experience. As an aside, of course, all of you are going through crisis management. This is something that that we're going to be talking about here for only 10 minutes, but we're going to really stick to the agenda and stick to the time planning. I'd like to maybe present one of the largest and most important professors who recently passed away. His name was Pierre Asner. He had a very simple but profound sentence, which is, war has always existed, but peace is nothing more than the invention of human beings. So to really take the reins of peace, it's something that asks for intelligence, for patience. And that's why, since the creation of humankind, we have invented various models as to how we can actually create and keep a hold and take on peace. There have been some models. What were they? The imperial models, meaning the strongest wins. This could be cited as Stalin as an example. We had also the balance of powers, which started in the 19th century, from the least powerful to the most powerful, everyone had the same powers. This worked for a while. There was a technological model, meaning that with the invention of the nuclear weapons, we were able to dissuade war and therefore create peace. And this was something that was being used in most of the 20th century. And this was the monopoly was held by the 5 members of the Security Council. And there was also another model called collective security, in which the Society of Nations, which was a failure, and then with the birth of the United Nations after the Second World War. So humanity was inventive and was able to really move forward with the idea of creating peace. And we had some successes and a lot of failures. But nowadays, we have to continue inventing new models. We have to invent a model which allows us to recreate peace once again. And not only in the hands of Westerners, but also in the thousands of hands of the entirety of the international community. So, two thoughts. Firstly, peace for which world and in which world? When you think about peace from a worldwide point of view or from a conflictual world point of view, we think about the world order, and the peace is underpinned by a certain system. And for us, Westerners, we tried, not only in Afghanistan but also in Iraq and Syria, we tried to create models which were not so successful as Hervé Morin showed us. This started with the end of at the end of World War II. It was built upon the use of military force, American and Western leadership, economic liberalism, democracy and human rights. These were the four pillars, the four Western pillars of peace, and that's how Americans tried to enforce democracy in Iraq in 2003. They were trying to enforce democracy in a country that they absolutely didn't know about, Afghanistan. So, and let the examples go on. So we're in a world in which the Western model does not always work. So what should be our strategy so that we can impose or recreate peace? Should we restore peace? Should we restore the model? Should we try to impose, despite everything, impose a model that we know from the get-go it probably won't work? Because the world that we're working in is not exactly the same as the Western world. We are no longer the only world power. So should we restore this model? If we go forward with the restoration model, it will be a failure. So should we try a new model, an adaptation model, adapt to new cultures, new power struggles? So with this model, how far can we go? And I think we have no common point with ISIS, but we have maybe common points with China. We can put together an adaptive strategy. It would be a good replacement of the old model. We asked Gandhi, it was a type of joke, what do you think of Western society or Western civilization? He responded, actually, I think it would be a good idea. That's my first thought. I have many points. I'm not going to talk about the last point, so I'll only go into the second point. We have to think about the dimensions of peace nowadays. We know that there are three definitions that are harmoniously existing today. We saw in the speech of the ambassador and also in Madame Shakeba's speech, we have three definitions of peace. Firstly, peace as international stability, which refers to traditional geopolitical matters. We also have peace as taking into account, acknowledging human suffering, what we called in the 1990s. Human security, so security of human beings and of different countries. And then the third definition of peace is planetary peace, meaning preserving the environment, which will allow us to really reside and not destroy the world. The difficulty that we have today to recreate peace is that we have institutions working in the various matters of peace, and they're not working together. The ecologists are working for the environment, NGOs for the human civil society, and diplomats are working for the various states. And the real question is, how can we really mold or meld together all of these definitions of peace? We have to invent a model that is Kissinger, Hulot, and a priest, Abbé Pierre, here in France. So if we were to create an institution that really represented the image of all these three people, we could go forward with a new model for peace. And that's really what I think. It's something that I'd like to maybe throw out to the panelists for them to think about. And I'd like to finish here with a quotation. It shows that you want to conclude with a quotation that is very good. It's a quotation from Blaise Pascal, which said, let me try to find it here.
Voilà.
We have to put together justice and power. And to do so, we have to make sure that what is fair is strong, and what is strong is fair. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madame Niceto. To finish up your speech with Blaise Pascal, it's really, really nice. Have a seat. So we're going to look at the debate now from three sides. We're going to look at the role of the United Nations, asking the final question, should we do away with the Council of Security? And I'd like to welcome Nicole Amnine, who is a member of a UN agency fighting for women's rights. And yesterday, Mr. Guterres asked us to think about multilateralism, and that's the second question. How can we reinvent multilateralism in the future world? And finally, states and global powers do no longer have the monopoly of power in international relations. So the last question, will peace become everyone's priorities? So to moderate this panel, a journalist here in France, he is the inventor of CO2, My Love. Please give a round of applause to Denis Chessou.
Merci à vous.
Thank you very much. Thank you for saying that I work at France Inter. I'd like to say that Madame Shekeba will be on a program next Wednesday, which will be dedicated entirely all day long to Afghan women. So yes, it's true, Nicole has said it quite well, that what we have to do in the 21st century for everyone here in the world is to start with our neighbors. It's not that. Please stay with us, because we'll have young people from Young 20, from SOS Mediterranean, and also Ninawa, which means father of the forests, and he will talk about what is happening in the Amazon. So let's start with the UN Security Council. Mr. Girard, please come up onto the stage. Sanda Beslika, please come up onto the stage. Have a seat where you wish. We have enough room here. So let's start with you, Mr. Girard. So the Security Council of the United Nations, it was created in 1945 following World War II. 15 members, 5 permanent members who have a veto vote. China, United States, France, Great Britain, and Russia. And I think we see here that this is where the problem starts. So, Mr. Girard, someone who knows a lot of the embassies, not all of them, but especially the United States and the United Nations. So before everything, this Security Council was created for what?
Well, in 1945, we wanted to draw the lessons from the creation of the Society of Nations, which was the equivalent of the United Nations between the two wars. But the great powers didn't have a veto right. So when they were in a minority, they had to leave the organization. So Japan was the first to leave because of the business in China. And those who know, are educated in this audience, you've read the Lotus Bleu, the Blue Lotus by Hergé, and you see Japan leaving the Society of Nations. Then there was Italy that left because of Ethiopia, and Germany because Hitler wanted to leave the Society of Nations, and the USSR, of course, that had invaded Finland in 1939. And so the Society of Nations became meaningless. And in 1965, the veto right was given to the great powers, the USSR, in 1945, sorry. The veto right was given to the great powers, and the USSR and the United States were dominating the world at the time. So it was a realistic approach. The Security Council recognizes that there are some countries that are more equal than others. Now, we'll see later on whether the Security Council should be reformed. But it's a pleasure to welcome David Malone, who is with us today from the United States. So, David Malone, please, as the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and also the Rector of the United Nations University, can you tell us whether this council can be reformed or not, and what is the whole point for you, and what can we change? Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. I'm going to have to leave you almost right now because we are very late. But I'd like to pay tribute to the two ambassadors that have spoken before with strength. And I would like to really say that I appreciated what they did in the field. It's much more difficult to do that than to be an ambassador in New York, which I was, and which Ambassador Haro also was. And I'm very happy to join my friend Antonio Diaga Patriota. So what about the Security Council? Well, we shouldn't think about reforming the Council of Security because the United Nations will not exist any longer. What I'm worrying about is not the members of the Security Council, it's the relevance of the United Nations and the fact that different governments, and the three greatest governments in particular, keep denying its use, and that countries like France, Germany, Great Britain, even my own country, Canada, find it very difficult to have an important role in the Security Council. I think that the permanent membership that France and the UK have used to give them a very special role, but nowadays, because of Brexit, they find it difficult to play this part, and also because the three great powers don't listen to them. Thank you, David Malone. Please continue your work, and thank you for being with us. Gérard will come back to a number of points you have suggested. Now, Antonio de Patriota, permanent representative at the United Nations. You are the special representative of Brazil and work at the Committee for Peace Building. Now, the question is, how can we restore peace, and what can we say about the Security Council today? If the Security Council becomes obsolete, what could we do?
And I think if we do away with the Security Council, we run the risk of transforming what today is, to some degree, organized international irresponsibility into disorganized international irresponsibility, with dire consequences and possibly chaos and the law of the jungle prevailing. So we must avoid that at all price. Of course, the ideal would be to reform the Security Council to make it more inclusive, representative, democratic, and establish new disciplines also for accountability. Because although, for example, in the medical profession, if somebody tries to cure a disease but makes a patient suffer from 3 other ailments, he can be sued for malpractice. Whereas in the international community, if you interfere in a situation that is bad and make it worse, there is very little that can be done except for some degree of accountability in a multilateral forum. And the Security Council, with all its shortcomings, does fulfill that role to some degree. So in the absence of an ideal Security Council, I think the best bet is to try to live with the one we have, and especially to preserve 2 essential elements in the UN Charter that Ms. Nicole Soto was mentioning, the bedrocks of collective security, namely that force should only be used in self-defense or with authorization, international legal authorization. Unfortunately, there have been very serious departures from these rules, and the record is discouraging. But if we do away with them, I think we are in even more dangerous territory. So I would really defend the idea of preserving what we have, increasing its legitimacy by looking at composition and looking at enlargement, but also introducing new disciplines for enhanced accountability, because this is how the soul searching that I've heard today here will have concrete consequences. For example, if you're responsible for the death of thousands of civilians after a military intervention and leave a country worse off than when you came in, well, perhaps you should receive in your territory the equal number of refugees from those countries, and things of that nature. Thank you.
Merci à vous, Antonio Patriota.
Thank you, Antonio Patriota. Now, we've understood that the remedy could be worse off than the disease, but that's what we always say. Now, today, what can we imagine? Is a new kind of multilateralism possible? This is the start of the second part of our debate. Wouldn't it be stronger and more viable in the current circumstances to have a new kind of multilateralism, a new forum for multilateralism? You talked about the possible enlargement of the Security Council and move on from veto right at 5 to a veto right for more countries, maybe? Are we ready for that? Is it a solution? Well, he's left us. I think that Antonio has left us. Well, anyway, thank you very much. So we asked everybody to be very brief, and well, our guest respected these instructions. Wonderful. Gérard Haro, can I ask you about the Security Council? Now, maybe I'm oversimplifying, but isn't the Security Council looking into conflicts that nobody cares about, that nobody is interested in? Well, the United Nations, it's the nations, but the nations disagree, they're not united. And the sad condition of the United Nations reflects the sad condition of the international situation. The United Nations reflect what we are. The decision-making power in the United Nations belong to the member states. When you said it's not possible to have Saudi Arabia, the Council for Human Rights, well, it was elected by the states. So don't blame the United Nations. Blame the states. Blame the countries. They are at the heart of the problem. They are at the origin of the problem. Now, what about the various conflicts on the planet right now? Well, the great powers never agreed for the United Nations to be in charge of their business. The United States always prevented the UN from taking charge of the Arab-Israeli conflict. China is preventing the United Nations to take care of Sri Lanka or Myanmar, etc., etc. And yes, it's true that the United Nations sometimes are involved in conflicts that nobody's interested in. But, well, there are very often hundreds of thousands of victims and refugees in DRC, in South Sudan, in other countries, in the Central African Republic, Haiti as well. And that's why the Security Council is still very useful. Is Antonio Patriota back with us? Fantastic. Fantastic. We found you again, Antonio. Thank you. So should we enlarge the Security Council? So we understood that the remedy was probably worse than the disease. So we need to maintain the Security Council. That's also what David Malone said. So what are the possibilities for the future of the Security Council? What are the possible solutions?
Some recent examples. For example, when there was a world economic crisis in 2008, the G7 that sometimes met with Russia also decided that it was no longer sufficiently representative of economic, financial interests around the world, and it expanded into the G20. Now, nobody today argues that we should go back to a smaller group. I think the advantages of expanding from G7, G8 to G20 are obvious to all. So likewise, there has been an international consensus since the early 90s that the Security Council would benefit from enlargement. The differences reside in whether the expansion should take place in both categories, permanent and non-permanent. Now, there are many different positions on this. For example, my own country, Brazil, has presented itself as a future permanent member, but I can assure you that from our perspective, the veto is not what we're interested in. Mm-hmm. What we're interested in is a capacity to follow through with our ideas, insist on some of our principles, and although we may have many shortcomings in Brazil that I would not deny, we have very good record when it comes to international peace and security. We haven't been at war with any neighbor for 150 years. We have signed non-proliferation agreements. We have established a non-proliferation zone for weapons of mass destruction in our part of the world, and we were the first country to sign the treaty on the abolition of nuclear weapons. So I think this is the kind of voice that you need in the Security Council, not only those with the largest arsenals and the most sophisticated weapons, but countries that have something to contribute when it comes to promoting peace, promoting understanding, and highlighting the benefits of diplomacy over military action.
Merci à vous, Antonio Patriota. À nos côtés.
Thank you, Antonio Patriota. Sandeep Vasikar is with us. He's the chairman of the Strategic Foresight Group, which is an Indian think tank. I explained briefly earlier on that it originated the Manifest for Peace, and it's been a long-term partner of the Normandy Forum. You work with 65 countries on the 5 continents, and you have raised the awareness of the Security Council to the issue of water. And well, in Normandy today we are well served with water, but it's not the case in other countries, of course. And you've encouraged the Security Council to become interested in water. You've done that also at the European Parliament and the House of Lords. Now, what could the Security Council do in favor of global peace, and what are its limitations in your view?
The Charter of the United Nations says that the main objective of the United Nations is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. This is in the preamble of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, has the United Nations succeeded in meeting this objective, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war? United Nations has done fantastic work on the social, economic, and many other fronts, but is it succeeding in saving the humanity from the scourge of war? So we have to ask ourselves as to what role should the United Nations and particularly the Security Council should play. And in future, we know, and I fully agree with other panelists, that there is no alternative to the existence of the UN Security Council. But what should be the form and what should be the terms on which the Security Council should exist? Now, Leo Paslowski is the author of the Charter of the United Nations in 1945. He had proposed at that time that there should be some permanent members who were the victors of the Second World War, but without veto. This is what was proposed by the author of the of the UN Charter. But Stalin took an objection, and Stalin imposed on all the founding states the condition of veto for the victorious powers. So the veto of the UN Security Council is vision of Stalin, which was accepted by the whole world. And all the countries in the world who claim to be great champions of democracy today want to leave the vision of Joseph Stalin in the management of the global affairs. And what are you succeeding with this vision? You failed in Suez, you failed in Vietnam, you failed in Iraq, recently you failed in Afghanistan, and you want to implement Joseph Stalin's vision. So we must seriously ask ourselves the question that whether the terms on which the Security Council operates, which were imposed by Stalin, whether they are relevant today in the 21st century, or whether we should develop a new vision.
Alors, nous avons donc...
So, we have spoken about Mr. Stalin. It's very important to understand how it was born and how these rules were imposed. So, and we have to know what is behind the Security Council. There's another aspect which is very important. The blue helmets, of course, it's very important to speak about them. They work in keeping the peace, and they're also part of the Security Council's mandate. Yes, I'd like to start with the question of the veto right. We have to change the charter. You have to have the agreement of 5 of all of the permanent members and 2/3 of the Security Council. So we'd have to think that all 5 of the permanent members give up their veto right. Of course, this is impossible. So let's look at what the United Nations do on the ground, because that's what's most important. The United Nations tries to manage these very conflictual, bloody conflicts, not only by sending the blue helmets around the world. There are about 120,000 of them in dozens of endeavors around the world. They have small problems, of course, we know that, but they try to implement stability and they save lives. So the Western powers don't send too many blue helmets. France, for example, sends a few hundred to Lebanon, and this is for historical reasons. And people aren't actually doing much in Lebanon. So normally nowadays, it's the developing countries that send the troops to the blue helmet contingency. They really are in the middle of all of the conflicts. And the salary of a blue helmet is $1,400 per month. And it's very less expensive than a French soldier, for example. Is Mr. Vasilika, are there other solutions? Is there a better alternative to the Security Council?
Mr. Ambassador, the blue helmets, I salute them to start with. But blue helmets will be very useful if there's a conflict between North Sudan and South Sudan, or in Congo, or in East Africa, or in Latin America. Will blue helmets and the UN Security Council be able to do anything if there is a clash between nuclear submarines of China and Australia in the South China Sea? Will the UN agencies and blue helmets be able to do anything at all if there is a clash between United States and Russian Federation? What is happening with the current security architecture when the global arms expenditure has doubled from 1999, when it was $1 trillion, to $2 trillion today? So after the Cold War, the global arms expenditure has doubled. And in the coronavirus year of 2020, last year, while the world was managing the coronavirus, the Americans, the Russians, and Chinese were introducing hypersonic missiles, which are not even going to be managed by human beings, but which will be run by the algorithms. So humanity is facing one of the most challenging moments in its history. And we have to look beyond beyond, we have to complement the Security Council, but we have to look beyond it also. So first, look at the terms of the Security Council. Second, start thinking from now as to how can we create a parliament of humanity to supplement the United Nations. United Nations organization is only in name. United Nations organization is actually a United Governments organization. It is not United Nations organization. Governments and nations are different. So while we need the United Nations organization, which is the United Governments organizations to conduct the affairs of the state and the relationship in between the state, we also need a parliament of humanity for the genuine representation of the human population and human aspirations and human hopes in the governance of the world. So we should start seriously looking at the global governance. And my last point, that the states and the community of states have proved that they cannot address certain problems. They cannot contain the arms race, which is out of hand. UN has not been able to find any solution to stop the arms race, or the nuclear arms race particularly. You cannot contain the dangers arising out of climate change. And you cannot contain a problem like pandemic that we just experienced last year. So we need a body, an instrument, an institution which can respond to the civilizational crisis. UN Security Council is in a position to solve the local problems in Africa, Asia, Latin America. UN Security Council is not in a position to respond to the crisis of civilization's existence. And we are now at the brink of the existence of humanity, existence of our entire civilization. Because if algorithms tomorrow start a conflict between two hypersonic missiles, within half an hour the world will be over.
Et c'est ce que disait tout à l'heure, effectivement, Nicole.
That's what Nicole said. We have to invent a new world, which is a mix of Kissinger, Abbé Pierre, and Nicolas Hulot. So maybe the Security Council is not the best place to solve questions of climate change and biodiversity. We'll look at this, Gérard, the $100 billion that have been promised but have not been paid up yet. So I maybe will digress a little bit, but it's quite important. It's very important for us. How do the Western people feel about it? And maybe as Westerners, we don't see this humiliation and this frustration that is present all around the world. And I'd like to answer our friend. Of course, the United Nations does look after climate change. We have the annual COP summit. It's not only the Security Council. We have the General Assembly, which looks at many topics. And there are various agencies that look after specific topics. And we have an organization where all of the world's states come together and look at climate change and try to fight against it. The COP 26, where our British friends will look after it. Yes, of course, the United Nations is a meeting point for all countries. Of course, there are various divergences in opinions. It's not quite simply because France or Britain doesn't want something, but it's because some countries don't want that other countries to become permanent members. Brazil wants to be a permanent member. France supports this proposal, but some Latin American countries don't want that. Germany is a candidate. Some big Latin countries in France do not want this. So it's not only the United Nations that doesn't want it, there are divisions amongst the various countries. So let's come back to what Mr. Badi said concerning Afghanistan and what Mr. Owen said to some extent. It's the feeling of Western people, which is then confronted with the feelings that people in the rest of the world may have. There are various Western military interventions, Iraq, Vietnam, etc., etc. These all led to failures. There's also resentment concerning climate change. Some developing countries say, you are telling us to do things that to not do things that you actually did. So we know that the Western societies polluted the world to great extent, and now we're asking the developing countries not to do it. And we're telling them, don't do something that we have actually done. And we say, we're going to pay you money to do this. We said that $100 billion was promised, but we see that the funds have not been released, even after COP21. We also have to keep in mind colonialism, and we also have to keep in mind, amongst all of these divisions, the Western world is a little bit on the defensive. So it's not only the West's fault, but it's also allowing the countries which have the darkest regimes with very negative values that they use this, and they fight against women's rights. They fight against women's reproductive rights, and they use this in the United Nations. Thank you, Mr. Sandeep. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Nicole, do you have anything else to add? No, I just have one thing to add. We think that the Security Council is the ideal victim. Firstly, because it represents a hierarchy of powers resulting from the horrors of 1945, and is it still current in 2021? We can understand. David Malone, a Canadian, who said that maybe France and Great Britain should be taken off of the Security Council because they're no longer big powers. But they are the perfect victim because they represent power play, victimization that no longer exists. And maybe it doesn't exist nowadays. It is built upon leadership, which is a totally non-democratic leadership. I think the only international solution could be, I don't think that it can happen that we have the 5 strongest members who actually lead and who say, well, it doesn't matter what the others think. So we have here in the European Union, we have 27 countries. What would happen if, for example, the 5 largest, most powerful countries, that they were the ones who were to take all of the decisions in the European Union? It would never work, and that's why I think the Security Council is the target of all possible criticisms. But I think it's kind of like the democracy that has been defined by Churchill. He said that democracy is the worst system, with the exception of all of the other systems. It's the worst system amongst all the bad systems. So maybe the Security Council could reform itself, not by extending its powers, not by shrinking its mandate, not by giving up powers to the General Assembly or to NATO, as the Americans tried to do in 1995, but maybe we could prepare the future. Maybe we could allow to reflect upon security questions that are important for the future, for example, cyber security, but also ethical questions in AI. How far can we actually go with AI? For questions concerning biotechnology, maybe how far can we actually go by using military medicine, for example? But I think the Security Council should have a new legitimacy, not by going back to the powers of World War II, but putting together solutions for 2045 or 2145. And I think then it would be less of a victim of criticism. Thank you very much, everyone here today.
Thank you for this first focus on the future of the UN Security Council. Now, a few methodological points. You see that the weather is really very bad. You'll be able to have lunch after the plenary meeting here, so don't leave the room. It will be your safe haven. Now, the Normandy for Peace initiative does not only involve our forum, it's permanent program throughout the year everywhere in the world. It's a community of partners, of academic and scientific institutions, and I'd like to thank all the sponsors that trust us and without whom nothing would be possible. Now, after 15 or 18 months of COVID, which of course had an impact on our agenda, now our conferences are starting again, and I'd like to invite you to Le Havre on November the 18th to think together about the world in 2049 in partnership with Lobs, the magazine. In 2049, there's something that is certain. We will probably be in the world that comes after. So what will multilateralism look like? Denis Chessou and Nicole Niesotto, you have the floor. Well, how can we reinvent the multilateralism? Now we are inviting the former director of the Development Center at OECD, Mario Pezzini. It works in a different way, and it's interesting to understand what its contributions can be. Please take a seat, dear Mario Pezzini. Nicole, do you want to say something? Well, if not, well, there's not only Mario Pezzini with us. We have a short video by Nicolas de Rivière, who is the French ambassador to the United Nations. First.
Mesdames, Messieurs, je tiens tout d'abord à remercier le président Morin et la région Normandie pour l'organisation de cette nouvelle édition du Forum mondial Normandie pour la paix. C'est une occasion importante de réunir des voix de différents horizons pour échanger sur les sujets qui nous préoccupent tous. La question qui nous est posée, comment réinventer le multilatéralisme dans le monde d'après, est d'une actualité brûlante. Nous avons vu depuis plusieurs années des attaques contre le système multilatéral de la part d'États qui jugeaient ne pas en retirer assez d'avantages ou qui voulaient le façonner à leur main. La pandémie de Covid-19 et les bouleversements qu'elle a entraînés ont montré que le système multilatéral devait être amélioré pour pouvoir mieux prévenir et mieux guérir. J'irai plus loin. Plus que dans le monde d'après, il faut se demander comment réinventer un multilatéralisme de tous les jours. Le multilatéralisme est en effet une méthode unique pour la diplomatie et l'action internationale au quotidien. La formule peut sembler banale, mais à problèmes globaux, il faut bien une solution globale. Nous ne pourrons rien faire pour la paix et la sécurité internationale, le développement durable ou le respect universel des droits de l'homme sans passer par ce cadre. Le ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères, Jean-Yves Le Drian, rappelait il y a quelques jours, ici à New York, à l'occasion d'une réunion de l'Alliance pour le multilatéralisme, les fondamentaux de l'attachement français à la méthode multilatérale. Cela part d'un constat. La coopération internationale ne va jamais de soi. Nombreux sont les cas où certains acteurs sont tentés d'agir seuls pour des questions de souveraineté ou de stratégie ou d'opportunisme. Pourtant, il n'y a pas d'autre solution que le multilatéralisme pour répondre au désordre du monde. Pour ne prendre qu'un exemple, nous ne pourrons rien faire pour lutter contre les changements climatiques qui affectent toute la planète si nous n'agissons pas tous ensemble. Et ce que nous devons rechercher, c'est un multilatéralisme des résultats. La méthode multilatérale que la France défend donne la priorité à l'action au-delà des incantations que l'on entend malheureusement trop souvent. Comment, dès lors, mettre en œuvre ce multilatéralisme efficace? Il y a bien entendu des réformes à mener. Cela passe par le renforcement de l'architecture multilatérale de santé, par exemple, afin de mieux prévenir et répondre aux crises sanitaires futures et en donnant à l'OMS les moyens de remplir pleinement son mandat. Mais le monde d'après reste très comparable au monde d'avant la pandémie. Les rapports de force, les grands enjeux n'ont pas changé. Il faut donc mettre en œuvre dès maintenant le multilatéralisme efficace que j'évoquais. Cela passe par la réaffirmation de la centralité du système des Nations Unies. L'ONU est en effet la seule organisation doublement universelle qui réunit tous les pays du monde et traite de tous les sujets. Après 75 ans, la Charte des Nations Unies reste d'une actualité frappante et ses buts et principes recoupent tous les grands enjeux d'aujourd'hui. Il est important d'avancer dans ce cadre avec tous les États
pour faire progresser tous les sujets, fût-ce petit à petit. L'universalité implique en effet l'unanimité. Il est souvent crucial de trouver le plus petit commun dénominateur pour faire progresser le consensus mondial. On peut susciter aussi des coopérations renforcées, comme les initiatives de l'Alliance pour le multilatéralisme, qui contribuent à relancer l'ambition sur des sujets essentiels, comme le respect du droit international humanitaire, ou l'initiative Information et démocratie, qui vise à lutter contre les infodémies. Il faut trouver à chaque instant une traduction opérationnelle aux décisions. C'est une question d'efficacité du système. Améliorer cette traduction opérationnelle passe par la réforme des organisations internationales, de leurs institutions et de leur financement. C'est un chantier difficile mais nécessaire pour améliorer la gestion et moderniser les agences, avoir un maintien de la paix plus robuste. Cela passe aussi par le renforcement de la bonne pratique au sein des institutions. Il serait nécessaire aussi de réfléchir à la mise en place de financements innovants pour garantir la pérennité et la liberté d'action des organisations internationales. Il faut veiller enfin à rassembler, encore et toujours, la société civile, mais aussi les acteurs infra- et supra-étatiques et le secteur privé. C'est la méthode française que nous avons mise en œuvre dans l'organisation des One Planet Summit ou du Forum de Paris pour la paix. Mesdames et messieurs, ces pistes de réflexion suggèrent bien sûr beaucoup de travail, mais invitent aussi, je pense, à l'optimisme. Depuis 30 ans, le multilatéralisme, comme les Nations Unies qui en sont l'expression suprême, s'est renforcé. Depuis 75 ans, je dirais même qu'il s'est plusieurs fois réinventé et s'est attelé à de nouveaux sujets, comme la lutte contre le terrorisme, par exemple. Il est important que les enjeux du futur, comme le cyber, par exemple, soient abordés dans ce cadre. C'est encore et toujours la recherche d'un multilatéralisme plus inclusif, plus solidaire et plus efficace qui doit nous guider, avec les Nations Unies et la Charte en leur centre. Cet acquis de 1945 demeure en effet plus que jamais une feuille de route à préserver et sur laquelle nous devons bâtir.
Merci Nicolas.
Thank you, Nicolas de Rivière, French ambassador to the United Nations. Well, when I listened to him when he talked about the world of the future, you know Michel Houellebecq, the writer, he said the world of the future will be like the world of before, but worse. That's typically what Michel Houellebecq says. Now, we can also talk about Charles Péguy, who was talking about holding the hand of hope. We need hope. We're human beings. We need hope. Now, what really comforts us is to try and take action as well. We understand, we see the chaos in which we find ourselves today. Mario Pizzini, I wanted to ask you to comment this. I know you want to talk about this. Yesterday, we denounced, we blamed the way people describe the future based on the past. Well, it was a joke actually, because when the crisis took place in 2008 at OCDE, there were two economists together and they were applauding each other. And one of them said, why are you doing this? Well, it's to make sure that crocodiles don't come near us. Well, he said, we're in Paris, crocodiles can't reach us. Well, it shows it works. It shows it works. Well, but I have another joke in mind. Well, anyway, we are just telling jokes. It's a joke that we used to tell under the Soviet era, but it could still be topical. It's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. You know this joke? The pessimist says, "Oh, everything is horrible. It couldn't be worse. The world is terrible. It couldn't be worse." And the optimist says, "Yeah, it could be worse. Don't worry, it could be worse." Yes, it's exactly what Houellebecq is saying. Well, how can we reinvent multilateralism in the wonderful world of the future? don't know whether it's the world of before that is lasting. Well, we understand that business is not making much progress at the Security Council with the states. What can we do maybe with the regions, NGOs, companies? Should we reinvent multilateral management? There is also the web. When you use Twitter, let me remind you that it's the first official supplier of hatred, so it's probably not the right solution. So, Mario Pezzini, how can we reinvent this multilateralism? Well, I've already heard a number of answers during these debates here because I heard 3 points that I think are key. Well, the two jokes, they show us that we need to recognize that the world is changing and we should not continue to refuse recognizing that things are changing. So what has changed? Well, the players first. We've built the architecture of multilateralism on a number of players that are still essential but not alone any longer. China, India, Brazil, Argentina, other countries have now contributed to changing the world. Where are they around the negotiation table, around the table? There has been decolonization. We did not really take this into account, actually. And then there was something very important that happened between 2000 and 2010. We did a short calculation. In fact, OECD countries, the richest countries, multiplied their growth rate by 2. And in the rest of the world, there were 83 countries that did better than double our own growth rate. The economy, the worldwide economy is completely different nowadays. There's an interesting calculation measuring the barycenter of the economy. 50 years ago, it was in the Azores, in the middle of the North Atlantic. Today, it's east of Turkey, and it's still moving towards China and the South in particular. So the world has changed and the players, the stakeholders have changed. Second point, what are our purposes? Their security, of course, but also economic and social development. The goal is reduction of extreme poverty, but we see that many countries today have overcome this threshold, but they still have major problems, in particular the fact that the social contract is broken. We could take the example of Chile. It was considered as a model in Latin America, and today it's hit by such a big social crisis that the constitution will have to be rewritten. Where Tunisia, before the Arab Spring, enjoyed a growth of 5% for 10 years with a deficit of minus 2%, but it was the best of the countries. Now, as Bertrand Badi said, there are forms of suffering that are obvious today. So poverty is not the only criterion. Now, third type of change, the method of cooperation. In fact, these methods were based on charity between a donor and a beneficiary, a recipient, and the donors set the rules of the game of who was going to be a donor. The Committee for Assistance to Development only includes 30 countries, and these countries are pure donors. So you can decide a cooperation policy. You cannot decide a cooperation policy without having the recipients around the table as well. Unfortunately, this is what we are doing. While you're saying that development aid is like a club of Victorian ladies drinking a cup of tea without changing anything. Yeah, it's almost the case. Some point in time, the donors decided to have partners. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, well, that's pure donors. Again, the Emirates as well. But we never talk with the recipients of aid. So if the world has changed, the system has not taken this change into account. We're still saying that if we beat our hands, the crocodiles won't eat us, won't come near us. So we think that the development aid money for the least developed countries will help them go beyond the poverty threshold. Yeah, exactly. But the poorest country in the world today is India, and it's not the primary recipient of aid. We have not understood that there are several stages in development. At the beginning, ideas were clear. There were a vision, a neoclassical vision of economy, an orthodox view of the market, and we thought that the market mechanisms would maintain people outside of extreme poverty. We see with COVID today that it's not the case, and it's the right time to change all this, because when did the multilateral system change in our history? During wars, after wars. So do we want to pay the price of war to get a different system? No, but we have another solution. We have the COVID crisis, and it could make change possible. Now, you know OECD very well, and there are 38 countries in OECD today, 22 are also EU members. And in fact, you have built not an administration, but a community of practitioners, of practices, where there are different targets, objectives, of course. You look into different issues, education, for instance, and you try to take the best from the countries where it works the best. So that could be an interesting possibility. Yes, that's a very good question. Now, you're talking about what OECD was at the beginning, after World War II, with the Marshall Fund, reconstruction. How do we manage this? Do we build an administration? It was decided not to do that, but to create committees in which the different countries affected, hit by war, would meet and talk to make an analysis, a diagnosis, because you need to understand what happened and not only the rules. And then you have to set priorities. You have to build trust as well, and then you decide what type of measures you should implement. Unfortunately, this rationale was slowly replaced by this love for standards, for the definition of standards. So you define standards, you pretend that they can apply to everybody, but that creates problems. There's no point defining standards if those to whom you want to apply these standards are not around the table. Now, the best example of that is the multilateral agreement on investments. The organization decided to come up with an agreement, but there were only 30 countries to make that decision around the table. So after decolonization, what happened? So we moved from 30 countries to 55. China became a member. Why? Because you had to have other players around the table, and you had to open the possibility for quiet discussions, but unfortunately, this dialogue has come to an end. Now, the United Nations are essential. The World Trade Organization is key as well. It provides a possibility for negotiations. We need them. But we need a third forum when countries can talk and discuss and learn lessons about public policies, etc. Where is this forum?
So, what is the role of the European Union and France in this context? Well, the EU, it has a commission which is the most geopolitical commission that has been in a long time, and I'm talking about its desire, not its result. It's a very difficult, daunting task. The EU's strategic line is strategical autonomy. We are no longer totally aligned with NATO, and we are no longer part of, quite simply, economic NATOs. How do we put that into practice? We saw the example with the submarine. We saw those with strong alliances for the Commonwealth countries, for example, England, the United States, and Canada. At the OCT, right now we have General Secretary who is Australian. The policies are really led by England, and there's a very strong support from Anglophone countries. Where is Europe in these mechanisms? I think we have to apply the strategical autonomy. I think we have to apply it. And we have to see which way we're going to go. But also we have to know how we're going to put together new alliances. Where are the alliances? What about the developing countries? How do we dialogue with China? Where is Latin America? It's quite simply disappeared. We talk about really the Pacific Ocean as the center point of all things. And what about Latin America? It's included in there. And how about Africa? This is a challenge. It's a big challenge. I just came back from Senegal. And what do you hear in Senegal? You hear European countries saying that there is the devil in Africa called China, which is doing things totally different. So we have to create very strong alliances to really export Western ideals. And however, if our narrative is as such, we have totally limited our possibility to implement a strategic autonomy, but we've also limited our positive results. We also have to look about the fact that the American program, Build Back Better, is in place. 60 billion. China invests also 60 billion. Turkey is also very present in Africa. So we have to avoid the fact that it becomes a flashpoint on the world stage. That's true. So we have to bring the main actors back to the negotiating table, and we have to discuss. So I'd like to give the floor to Nicole, and thank you very much for your explanations. Let's not talk about hope, but what is positive? You've spoken about a few possible pathways, but let's put together our collective intelligence and try to look about how we can move forward. I think that we have to work with developing countries. We have to start putting together negotiating tables, and they have to be invited to negotiate. We could, for example, take into, as an example, the African Union, which reunites all of the main powers, China, Turkey, Japan, the European Union. But I think we have to really increase such initiatives. I don't think that we can change everything and say that the Security Council is changed, OCD is changed, etc., etc. We have to put together new experiments. Some people call it polylateralism, other people call it multilateralism. But I think we have to put together new coalitions and hope that they work. The Global Fund to fight against COVID, COVAX, is an example. How about the role of NGOs? I know they are very different sizes and spread out all over the world. Yeah, it's fundamental. I think there is social suffering. I think it's very strong. And if we do not give a solution to this social suffering, the result will be the rising up of totalitarianism and populism. And that's why I think we have to involve the various social actors in the debate. So we see the various actors that were protesting in the streets, protesting against transport costs. When you see, for example, in Chile, people protesting because of subway prices rising. There's always a secondary element which causes a large demonstration. And people don't know actually how these people are living, and that's why NGOs are very important. That's why various deliberative processes are important. We have to put together new national development plans, but we have to start with the regions, the rural areas, the cities, and we have to speak with the actual inhabitants rather than speaking with, for example, the civil servants or mayors. So thank you very much, Mr. Mario Pizzini. So, Madame Nicole, three things that I'd like to come back to what you said. Firstly, to make a comment about our ambassador to the United Nations. I am very happy that Francis Chun found a new concept called multilateralism of action. And I think the European Union was built upon effective multilateralism, which was invented in 2003 in the European Defence Security Strategy, which France found totally abominable. So we were the first countries really lobbying for effective multilateralism. So it's true that after 10 years, France has taken on this policy again. Considering, secondly, development aid from the European Union. We give 60% of development aid in the world. You have to keep in mind that the European Union spends 150 billion on military, whereas we give 200 billion on development aid. So it's 60% of public aid given to development aid, and it's given mainly to African countries. We have to look at the numbers 20 or 30 years later. The EU countries which have helped the most are those that are most at war. So it's urgent, it's pressing that the European Union really looks at its agenda for development aid to put in place controlling and auditing of these amounts. The European Commission gives money to various countries in which there is no auditing. Kosovo is the country that receives the most development aid per inhabitant from the European Union. And I think this is not a good idea because it's not the poorest country. So I think the European Union cannot continue spending 60% of its development aid without asking any questions as to its efficiency, especially in Africa. I don't think we should stop development aid, but I think we have to look at it differently. Thirdly, multilateralism. It is underpinned by three principles. Inclusion, meaning that we have to speak with and include all of the states, including our worst enemies. So, for example, the Americans didn't want multilateralism with Iran. This is a mistake. But you have to put everyone in the multilateral institutions. Secondly, equality between the states. And this gives way to a problem of leadership, because if everyone is equal, who is the leader and how does the system go forward? And then we have what's called multilateralism. And we know that it's something that's extremely difficult, but it works. For example, for COVID, it was United Nations initiative, and it works, COVAX. Same thing for HIV/AIDS, and it was one of the biggest victories of the United Nations in health matters, that they were able to really put together a method and an answer for public health. So I think we have to look at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and really see how to move forward. And I think that multilateralism is better than really striving for unilateralism. And I think when the United States does not abide by, for example, a climate agreement, and when it does not abide by its agreements with Iran, for example, when it decides alone to depart from Afghanistan, I think it's the last knife in the back of the multilateralism and of international institutions. Thank you very much. Just quickly, what would you like to say? Anything? I think we have to look into the details. We have to look at development aid and really go into the crux of the matter. And when we look at the European Union and all of the important actors, they've put together a new development consensus. So it was the idea to not only go from donors to net receivers of funds, but more to look at partnerships. So let's look at two things. First of all, you have to sit down with the other person, know about its various specific situations, and try to cooperate. Now when we say, now that we're equal, I want to really impose my values, and I am the powerful European Union, and this second solution will probably not work. I don't think it will go very far. Thank you very much, Mr. Mario Pizzini. Thank you very much for these exchanges and reflections upon multilateralism and what are the characteristics of multilateralism. It's a pluralism, and it's one of the founding points of the Parliament is also the fact that there are various opinions and feelings. So international relations are actually concerning governments. And that's why we have included the various parliamentarians in this forum, and we've included them in a platform. Parliamentarians from 5 continents work together during the year, looking at the question in detail. So I'd like to ask Madame Catherine Morin-Desailly, co-president of the Parliamentary Forum, and also I'd like to ask Thomas Friand, founder of Open Diplomacy Institute. I'd also like to ask Rosa Björk-Romstadil, member of the Icelandic Parliament, and also Manish Tiwari, a previous Indian communications minister.
Quelques minutes, mais on souhaitait vraiment mettre en avant.
Just a few minutes to talk about parliamentarians who are working for peace, not only from the founders of this initiative, but also to parliamentarians concerning this initiative, and we'd like to hear what their opinions are. So first of all, Catherine Morin-Desailly, why was this platform put together? I'd like to also call out to Fernando Iglesias, who is also parliamentary from Argentina, and then also to Togolese parliamentarian. Yes, everyone is here. So we came together with all of these parliamentarians. We are also connected remote with other parliamentarians. So that's the idea. Actually, the idea underpinning this initiative is that everyone is an actor in creating peace. We all look for solutions, especially concerning human security, and nobody can put forward a solution alone in their own country. We have to work together. I also noted that Nicolas de Rivière called for intra-state structures, and we had to put this in place. We have a role to play. And we do this throughout the entire year. We exchange, we talk about our opinions, and then we look at concrete solutions. We talk about the veto right at the Security Council. It's a very fragile environment. So we have propose that the veto right be really managed and put into a specific framework, that we don't create genocide or war crime situations.
Thomas.
Thank you, Catherine. Thomas Friand. How were the MPs on the 5 continents chosen, and based on what criteria? Well, they were chosen through the eyes of a simple citizen with no mandate, with no democratic mandate. It is the expectation for a true leadership, development and change, people in a network that can work cross borders and address global issues without any talk of national sovereignty leaders who work in spite of their parties, beyond their parties, because sometimes it makes it more difficult. And they need to work above intellectual borders as well, because these issues are very complicated. I'm thinking about the SDGs. There are 17 of them, and they cover the whole issue of sustainable development, and that includes this peace. Manish Tiwari was a Minister for Communication. He knows that communication is not trivial, and political leadership, is embodied by members of parliament. And our team, the MPs for Peace, aims at working across the borders. And it's legitimate. It's a historical legitimacy, and we want to be able to start a dialogue outside of our parliaments, and Manish Tiwari will tell us more about this. Thank you, Thomas Friand, founder of Open Diplomacy. Well, it is an honor to welcome you here in Normandy, Mrs. Rosa Björk-Bristol-Dottir, because amongst the topics that you are addressing, there is, of course, the environment, climate change. In your view, how popular is the voice of members of parliament, and what added value can you contribute to this fight? Well, I hope that I can bring a lot of added value. I'm going to switch to English.
Thank you all for the invitation, and it's great to have 2 parliamentarians here from a country with 340,000 inhabitants and 1 billion point plus. So this is how we can communicate and work together. And we have the same voice, actually, in that kind of cooperation. So the parliamentarians, we have a unique position because we are chosen by the public and represent the public. So we have the means to affect the policy making on behalf of the public demand and the votes behind us. And there has been a strong and growing demand from the public and the voters, especially from the young voters that I hope that are not leaving the hall here, on more stronger and more active engagement and action on the climate change and to prevent the climate change. And it is our duty and responsibility to do so. And what we did in our peace policy platform, which is here, that you can read here in our text, we, because you were asking me about my input in it, I put a special focus and accent on the social justice and human rights when it comes to environmental issue. And that is a huge issue and huge thing, because we know that climate change and peace are interconnected. Why? Because the effects of rapid climate changes creates instability and will trigger fight over natural sources and will trigger movement of people fleeing their homes and their sources of alimentation and so forth. So that is one of our biggest tasks of the current times and also the near future. And we as parliamentarians, we have a strong and big responsibility to act on that. And the only way to act on that is through cooperation and through dialogue and through multilateralism, as we've spoken so much about here today. So I think that we see that also in the Council of Europe, where I have been as a vice president, There we have a member from 47 countries representing 800 million people and voters. And that is a very good example of how parliamentarians can use their relationship and work together on promoting human rights, rule of law and democracy.
Merci beaucoup, on peut vous applaudir.
Manish Tiwari,
Manish Tiwari, scientific, technological and digital changes are showing blind spots or vacuums in international regulations, whether in terms of legal or ethical regulations. What are your solutions to fill those gaps?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us at the Normandy Forum. It's wonderful to see so many young people and people of different age groups together in one room. And after 18 months of COVID-19, I cannot tell you how much of a pleasure it is feasting on so many people together in one place. Thank you very much. Well, we are on the cusp of what is called the fourth industrial age. And so therefore, as we go forth, the future of humankind is actually going to lie at the crossroads of innovation, of automation, of artificial intelligence, of technology, and it has profound implications for the future of humanity. But above all, the one thing that we are all now addicted to, if I can use that phrase responsibly, is the Internet of Things. And the Internet, when it was conceived, was the most audacious experiment in anarchy, and it has succeeded. It today represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never in the history of humankind has so much power concurrently resided on so many fingertips. There is more data which is churned out today, every day, than from the dawn of civilization to the turn of the 20th millennium. And what you see as the future of humankind, it lies at the intersection of a virtual civilization which is still evolving and a brick and mortar civilization which evolved over the millennia. And unfortunately, if we do not put in place agreed rules of engagement, like we saw the rise of the Internet during our lifetime, we would see the demise of the Internet. We are already seeing the balkanization of the Internet. China has turned the Internet into a huge intranet. Other countries also would, based upon either religious affiliations or hegemonistic principles, try and balkanize the net. So therefore, it is important for legislators, because ultimately governments are accountable to the legislature. So it is imperative that legislators around the world, parliamentarians and others, need to drive this conversation to ensure that this beautiful space that we have created, which allows us to almost network with each other, link up in real time, is preserved, protected and strengthened. And I think they're the Parliamentarians for Peace, and I would like to thank the Open Diplomacy Institute. I would like to thank our chair. They have created this or curated this beautiful initiative, and I hope we are able to take it forward.
Thank you so much.
Merci, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Well, we would like to greet the parliamentarians of the 5 continents. We would like to greet them. Can you stand up if you are in the audience? There are many of you. The members of Parliament for Peace. It's a wonderful initiative. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your initiative. Okay, take your seats. Nicole and Denis, please stay put. And Thomas, sorry, our discussions are continuing. Now, members of parliament are elected by the people. That gives them their legitimacy for some years now. We've seen that citizens want directly to address these issues that cross the borders. Peace, more than ever, seems to be everybody's business. And for this last part of our plenary meeting, well, the audience is yours, Denis Chessou and Nicole Nesoto. Well, I'm going to ask Constance Courtalon, Chief Nawa, and Vapsal to join us on stage. Please take your seats. Well, we need to use headsets to understand Portuguese. Chief Ninawa, please take your seat. You're the chief of the Uniqui people in Brazil, in Acre, which is in fact in the northwest of Brazil, not far from Bolivia and Peru. That gives you an idea of where Acre is, and we'll see that, well, peace is far from being won with Bolsonaro. That is not helping. Well, we might have guessed that. Constance Courtalon, there are many young people here, and you understand all these matters. We started with the Security Council, then we moved on to multilateralism, and now we are going to include civil society, NGOs, and youth that you are representing here in Normandy. Constance Courtalon, you went to a business school, you come from the Vosges region of France. Now, what does Youth 20 represent today, and what are you doing in practice? Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of talking in front of you. I'm very happy to express myself in front of so many people, so many young people in particular. What I want is to create beliefs and convictions. Now, Y20 was born thanks to Thomas Friang, who talked before me. It's a wonderful endeavor that gathers together young people from all G20 countries, and delegations of 3 people are sent everywhere to defend the messages of young people. We focused in 2020 on climate change, the emergence in terms of climate change, of the fight against discrimination, and the gap that was created by the pandemic in education. I'm not any longer head of delegation, but others have taken over. But all young people are committed. You understand those messages. You can speak. You will be listened to. You will be heard. So do it. Now, let's not talk about everything that young people can do, but like Hannah Arendt used to say, only hope can save us. Well, there's Greta Thunberg, that is proof of that. Well, but we see that things are changing in terms of climate change. So what's your added value? What is the difference in terms of your contribution? No, I think that Youth 20's difference is that we need to start by negotiating on very sensitive topics with a feeling of respect and compromise. And we talked previously about the need to have everybody around the table, all stakeholders around the table. And, well, it is fantastic to be able to do something together. And again, please, my message to all the young people in the audience is to try and do that, because you have great messages to convey, and you will be heard again. Now, what subjects did you discuss together? Climate, of course, and that created tensions, because some countries are against fighting climate change. But we succeeded in creating a communique, a release that can be read online, and that had a very positive echo amongst heads of states. Of course, it's only a document, a text, but it shows that young people, who are the future of the world, are concerned about the climate. Now, does it mean that today we can live together, still in a space that will become more and more reduced, where the population will keep growing? Well, that's interesting, because we were discussing this before. Now, I'm a young woman, I'm 26, and I'm not thinking, when I think about peace, I'm not thinking immediately about wars, conflicts worldwide, which was what was discussed. For me, peace means peace among citizens. It's when you leave your apartment, your house in the morning, you go down in the street. How do you behave? How do you behave with beggars, with people around you? So for me, this is what peace means. When we need to make our peace with the planet, because in 20 or 30 years, peace will be threatened, jeopardized because of climate change, and we don't understand that sufficiently. And the young generations will have to make do with this. So how can you make peace with your planet and your neighbors? This is what we've been trying to do for 20 years. It's wonderful.
It's very interesting because you're speaking to us about respect and not necessarily about security. So we're going to talk with Mr. Ninawa in the Amazon, in your country. So, and there it's very complex. Not only from the scientific point of view, we talk about the world's lungs of the Amazon forest, with the Indonesian and the Congolese forest, which are the three large forest poles in the world. But there the perspective is huge, and there are deaths every day. So, Mr. Ninawa, it's a very beautiful word. It means father of the forest. So you are really responsible for the Onikwi people. It's a very small tribe, about 16,500 people. I also wanted to flag Gerd-Peter Bruch's documentary, who is a co-founder of Defenders of Mother Nature, and it reunites all indigenous people from 25 countries, which are try to develop. It's called Terra Libre. What is this alliance, Mr. Ninawa? What is today's situation at home with Bolsonaro, with the Brazilian Congress, which is a type of bulldozer, which is trying to exploit the forest? 10,000 square kilometers disappear on a daily basis.
Quero agradecer ao grande espírito por esse momento.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this event, and I would like to thank the organizers of this very important event. The situation in Brazil nowadays is very, very difficult. It's the worst situation that we have been through up until now. Nowadays, we call it a big world war because we're attacking Mother Nature. We are close to the third world war here. We have very clear enemies. Let's look at two. These are two enemies that we see every day. First of all, progress. Secondly, development. These are two very clear enemies. And human beings are at the base of all of this. Human beings are enemies of peace and enemies of nature. We see coordinated attacks on the Brazilian Amazon, especially coming from the Brazilian parliament. They vote upon bills which are negative for the populations and also for the Amazon. Unfortunately, these endeavors or intentions will only bear fruits to very few people. Only the big, large capital or the capitalist system will benefit from this. Every day we see murders. Our leaders are murdering people every day. We are confronted with a situation that is a personal threat on a daily basis. And it doesn't only affect our community, it affects many communities. You can see what's happening in North America, for example, things that are happening in Europe, for example. So nowadays, this huge attack is also a spiritual attack. It's happening in China with COVID-19. COVID-19 is a reaction, is Mother Nature's reaction. She's telling us clearly, stop attacking nature. Nowadays we see people who have goodwill and who want to change this situation, but I don't think it will really be entirely successful. I would like to give you some examples. We have meetings, forums, international summits where we talk about climate emergency. We also have very important events, for example, COPE event. We can go to these events and really sit down at the table and discuss. We can talk about our planet, but financing of all of this is coming from the capital markets, big capital. And that is a problem. We don't have any voice at these big events. There are types of trade fairs, there are discussions between governments and large institutions. The governments are linked up very closely with these multinational companies. So the economic interests are the ones that take the upper hand. And humanity or human beings do not really have a word. They cannot give their opinion. So in the name of my people, I would like to say something to you. I'd like to say something to the youth that are here today. We have a large responsibility to move forward towards a better world, to give to our future generations. It's something very important, and we have this hope, which is very important. Hope brings with it something better. But we can't wait. We can't just simply sit back and wait. We have to act, react. We hope that the elections will bring a better government in Brazil, but we've been waiting for that for years and years. Now, time is up. We have to act now. Young people, please, stand up. Think about your future. What should we do to create true peace? I would like to give you two examples. Youth. Think about what happened in the past. Speak with elderly who may be in your family or in your cities who are around you. Look for the wisdom that is incarnated in these elderly people. They are like libraries. They give us information as to understand how the world actually works, especially in this modern society that we live in with the technological advances that are rapid and widespread. But the real values, we can find these with the elderly. And when you look for the wisdom that is incarnated in these elderly people, you can come in contact with the spirituality that is within you. Plant trees. Discuss with your friends and try to plant the maximum amount of trees possible, 2, 10, 100 trees. You have to give back to Mother Nature, who gives us actually so much. We cannot destroy the Amazon. If the Amazon is destroyed, human beings will be over. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you for listening to me. But please acknowledge what I have said to you and think about it. Thank you.
Ce que nous dit Kasik Ninawa, comme le disait aussi
Yes, Mr. Ninawa, you also spoke words that I've also heard from Raoni. We know that there is no future without nature. We're quite simply walking aimlessly. Nowadays, in the Manche department in France, we have gone from 50,000 kilometers to 16 kilometers. Why have we been destroying this? Because we want to increase the productivity of our Norman cows. And why is that? Because they will produce milk for Chinese who love Isigny milk and Isigny butter. So this is the system that we've been talking about that is linked up with nature. It's not human on one side, nature on the other. Human beings are part of the nature. And when we look over and above all of that, let's look at the Amazon. We have to look at the various rare trees. We also look at various soy plants, which are fed to our cows here in Normandy. It's also part of our daily consumption. We don't have to really punish ourselves over and over again, but we have to keep in mind
à polluer la terre-mère
that we cannot authorize certain actors to pollute, to allow them to pollute the world and to give them money, and then as in exchange allow them to stock carbon and get some type of return. Firstly, I think it's totally a violation of all of the rights of the forest. No one can really calculate a river's value, a forest's value. What is the spiritual value of these things? All of these things are underpinning human beings' existences. We are against it. We have to look after we have to look after nature. It's our mother. We can't look at it from a purely commercial business point of view. Forests, rivers, these are sacred beings. Who does not like to drink pure water? Who does not like to breathe clean air? Who does not like to eat high-quality food? So it's very complicated, this idea that Mother Nature is part of the business cycle. Mother Nature is a supra-value. There's no economic value in Mother Nature. Of course, we say we're doing okay, and we could put some type of spiritual value, but we don't know. We know that we're doing well, but the Western countries have seen nature either as a pleasant area to have fun or some type of resource that we can use without an end. But we see that the planet is telling us that the world's thermostat is totally out of line, and that at the same time the resources have been used too much. So I think it's very important to listen to Mr. Kasik's speech, and I think that you have made a call out to our president, Monsieur Emmanuel Macron. So Can you please tell us what is this Mother Nature Alliance, and what are your expectations for the youth that you've just spoken about, and the people who may not be young people? Can you please tell us what are your expectations? So yes, I am part of this alliance. It's an alliance of various planetary indigenous people, and they also have this spiritual relationship with the planet. They are very important partners. We have various interests. We have spoken with the European Union especially. We put forth a petition. We proposed an initiative, an agreement for a partnership with the European Union and indigenous people. It's included in Article 6 of the European Union Agreement concerning indigenous community and natural resources. I wrote a letter to Mr. Macron, and I asked him to send out a public message. And I reiterate what I said. I want for him to speak about this publicly. I want him to speak about what the world is going through, not only in the world, but also in the Amazon with Mr. Bolsonaro, who is attacking our rights. France has worked hard on this matter and has encouraged us to protect our indigenous people and led to us putting together a program PG-7. Thank you very much. Fabienne Nassal. You're also director of the SOS Mediterranean. Would you a few words? It's also very important what you're saying. Nowadays we have migrants that are sailing on the Mediterranean. On one side it's misery, on the other side it's the El Dorado with the European. So your organization, SOS Mediterranean, what is it exactly, and is it a federation?
Absolutely. SOS Mediterranean is a European civilian association for search and rescue at sea in the Mediterranean Sea, and it was born following the failure of states that stopped looking at the Mediterranean, that started ignoring the Mediterranean. So it was created in 2015, right after Italy decided to put an end to its Mare Nostrum operation, involving a fleet of 6 ships that were assisting people who are trying to cross the Mediterranean, and some of them were drowning, of course. This operation lasted only for 1 year between 2013 and 2014, but it assisted 150,000 people in 1 year. And it's following this that European citizens thought, well, if the states don't want to take their responsibilities any longer, it is now the turn of us, of the citizens, to do it. And that's how citizens got engaged and decided to charter a ship, the Aquarius, first until 2018, and since 2019, the Viking, the Ocean Viking, that is navigating between Libya and Italy on this part of the Mediterranean that is the most deadly migratory route in the world. Now, Europe stopped doing anything about this, and the response of Europe following the stop that Italy put to its operation was not to help. And once the operation stopped, the crossings continued and even increased. Now you have 650 volunteers today, 19 desks. You have 50,000 children in the schools that you met to explain. You're also peacemakers. You save lives, but you also make peace. Yes, it's important, of course, to rescue people. We've rescued many people since 2016, 30,400 and 203 exactly. But it's not our only mission. We also need to bear witness, to provide testimonies, to raise awareness. We go to schools, festivals, conferences. Our volunteers go to this fora and they explain what is going on in the Mediterranean, and they explain who these people are. For us, these people are not migrants. They are people who are escaping countries. They are men, women, children, and our role, the role of volunteers, is to help them out. And we are calling you to join us, to join SOS Mediterranean. We have a booth here in Caen at the Forum Normandy for Peace, and we also have a desk in Caen. So please join us. Because we need to share the stories of those people who tell us their life story, and that's also how we can create peace. When you better understand what the different phases of migration are, because this is something that we've discussed throughout the morning. And it's more important to rely on testimony than on numbers. It's much more important. So thank you very much. Again, this is everybody's business. Thank you very much to you. Thank you to the region for organizing this forum and this plenary meeting. We will continue. Now, what's going to follow now? A lot of other discussions will take place this afternoon. Thank you to all the speakers, Denis Chessou, Nicole Niesotto, for participating to all these roundtables. You can really give them a big round of applause. Right, so it's true that Normandy for Peace, through this plenary meeting, the various debates, gathers together many talents and people, and we will continue this afternoon, and you can go to our website if you want to hear some replay. Now, we don't want to weaken the problems of the world that surrounds us. The world is becoming more and more complex every day. Humankind is challenged. We need to unify our forces and encourage noble hearts and souls. It's a vibrant call. Will there be enough of us to answer that call? Will we be on time? We believe in this. That's why our forum exists. So let's keep the flame of liberty and peace alive. Thank you. You can visit the Village for Peace, the studio, and you will be able to meet some of our speakers and continue discussing all the topics we've been addressing since yesterday. At 4:15, different authors will be present at the pop-up library for book signing, bookstore, for a book signing session. And the discussions will start again at 2:30. So thank you again and have a very nice afternoon. And enjoy lunch, of course.
Skyline, I wanna reach that skyline.